o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the February 10th, 2020 meeting of the Addison Northwest School District Board of Directors. Welcome, everyone. And I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda as written.
Second.
Okay, second, dueling second here. I will just say Gloria is away this evening because it's her daughter's birthday. So we have
Christina.
Our illustrious clerk, Christina, taking minutes for us. So
Thank you.
maybe just,
Thank you, Christina.
yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, so we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Any changes, edits? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? The motion passes. That brings us to our auditor's report. Elizabeth, do you want to do an introduction, or?
So we did bring our audit back to our last meeting. So we kind of did our own little review, but today we have Josh Quinn here, and he's from Auditor company. So he's just going to kind of give a little overview, and then if any board members have any questions,
Great,
ask.
thank you. Thank you for coming.
Sure, absolutely. Ron Smith of Auditor Smith may walk in at some point. It will be obvious when he does, if he does. Well, thank you for having me. So really what I usually do for these presentations is I'm just going to call out page numbers and statements and schedules, and I'll point you to a couple of figures and really just give a very brief and broad overview of the audit and any comments that we have. And we'll go over some of the management letter comments as well, which is kind of really, I think, sort of the more useful aspect from a board level perspective, some of the comments that we had while we were doing our work. So the first one I'm going to start with is page 15, which is statement C. This is your balance sheet. Most people typically will focus on the general fund. I think you've already all gone through this with Elizabeth. So general fund, your unassigned fund balance, which is at the bottom, shows us $31,275. Inside of that is the $18,000 plus or minus figure you were talking with Elizabeth about. That's $31,000 because that also includes the non-spendable. So in the calculation, non-spendable is money, it's basically prepaids. So it's money you've already spent that's actually for FY20. So on July 1st, that non-spendable amount basically goes away, and it fills that, decreases that negative number from 31,000 down to 18,000, which is what you guys have been talking about. On this page also, there's your major fund, your performance contract fund is a major fund based on the revenues and expenditures. Then other governmental funds, which we'll get to later on down in the audit. Those are your special revenue funds, your capital project funds, and any permanent funds that you may have. So next page will be, and if you have questions, holler them out, don't be shy. Page 17 is statement E. This is your revenue and expenditures for the year. Also, general fund is always the main focus. Your revenues of $21,398,000. Your expenditures of $21,761,000. Your other financing sources, that's transfers in and out. You had a lot of yes.
Sorry.
Yep.
I'm following along and I'm not seeing these numbers.
Okay, so you're on page 17?
I'm on page 17, yeah.
Statement E.
What's this? Yeah, page 17.
Under total revenues,
Yeah,
21,398.
I got 21,842.
What do you have over there?
This is, I'm looking at the audit that's on the website. Final 2018.
2019.
There, okay. That might be part of the problem. Thank you.
Shared at the last board.
Yeah, I know. I assumed to be on the website. I didn't bring it with me, so I was hoping to go.
It also should be attached to the last board meeting's agenda.
That's what I said, yeah. Okay, so it's not on, I'm sorry. So it's not on, I didn't see the 15, that's why I went into the 18. So the 19 is not on the website yet.
Okay, maybe not.
Okay.
I thought maybe Gloria
And
had
thank
it.
you, and I apologize for interrupting.
Sure, yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So I think I was talking about transfers. You had a lot of transfers out this year, which were basically making whole a lot of special revenue funds that you had deficit balances in, which was a resolution you guys passed, I think, in 18.
Yes.
Yep. And so this shows your net change in fund balances of $1.4 million. You had, at the start of the year, $1.899 million, and so at the end of the year, you have $461,000 total fund balance, and that includes assigned and committed as well as unassigned, and we will get to where you have assigned that money to later in a couple more pages. Page 34 is your long-term debt schedule. So your bonds payable at the end of FY19 are $11,640,000. $645,000 of that is due in FY20. You've probably already paid those because those usually due in November. There's a detail of all your bonds payable below that spreadsheet there on page 35, 36. So as far as long-term debt, you guys actually have a low amount of long-term debt compared to many of the school districts that I audit in the state. Page 38, so this is your various fund balances. Yep.
Did you say we have low debt?
Yeah, compared to many of the school districts that I audit, you
And that
don't have a lot of debt.
generally punishes us when it comes to the threshold. Like, if other districts have a lot of debt, that factors into a way for them to stay under the per pupil threshold, so.
It keeps them from a penalty.
Keeps them from a
Doesn't keep
penalty,
them under the
right.
threshold per se, but it keeps them from getting a penalty even if they're over the threshold.
Okay. Just, it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, we could,
It's in our,
we do borrow money in order to pay it back.
the incentive,
About this.
the incentives are there to borrow money as much as possible from the state. Just so everybody knows that's a difficult place for us to be. If we have low debt, being fiscally responsible, we're the ones who are hurt because of that.
Right, yeah, we talked about this.
Nice point.
So just to clarify, that 11,640,007 of that is the performance contract. Right, I'm just confirming. Okay, thank you.
And then there's like a year left on the Virgin's Elementary and the rest
Virgin's
is on
High School
Bears-
has-
Oh, the high school, and the rest is on Beresford, correct?
All right, back to your fund balance on page 38. So note 11, that's your restricted fund balances. Note 12 is committed, so those are things that are committed in special revenue funds or capital project funds that have particular uses that have been approved. And then assigned fund balance, this is for your, what you have assigned in FY20, which was both budget, going back to the taxpayer, I think $430,000, and $50,000 was being sent over to one of the capital project funds. Okay. I'm going to skip all the VISTers and VEMRs, which is your state teachers retirement system and municipal employee retirement system, just because it's long and complicated, and basically that all comes from the reports we get from the state. So it's kind of just a lot to say that that the state has a lot of liability there, and they partition off that liability to all the school districts in the area to make their own balance sheet look better. Page 62, Schedule 1. So this is your budget to actual in your general fund. This is a very broad stroke at this. There's much more detail in page 69, which is Schedule A and Schedule B, gets into more line item detail of what your budget to actual was if you were looking for more information. And this also shows your beginning fund balance at the top line. That's budgetary fund balance of $1.899 million. Goes through your revenue that we talked about, your expenditures, and gets your total fund balance of $461,000 at the bottom there. Page 69 is Schedule A. That's a more detailed look at your revenues. The next page starts Schedule B, and that's a pretty expansive look at all of your expenditures broken up by direct instruction, student transportation, support services, administration, so on and so forth. Page 73 is Schedule C. And this ties back to the first schedule we looked at, or the first statement C we looked at, which is a listing of all your non-major governmental funds. So this is your special revenue funds, your capital project funds, and your permanent funds. And if you go further on, it actually breaks each special revenue fund down into an asset sheet and an expenditure and liability, or expenditures and revenues, so you can see what actually transpired in each of those funds throughout the year of FY19. And the last thing that we look at is the CFA, which is all the way at the end. That's your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Because you spend over $750,000 in federal money, you're required to do a single audit, or we're required to do a single audit. And so that just lists all of your expenditures, and we do some testing based on the programs that all that money was spent in. So that's the numbers. I'm going to jump over into the management letter. So the first thing, liability account reconciliations. We talked through with, oh, I'm sorry, management letter. So this, the whole other document, yeah. So liability account reconciliations is something we talked to Elizabeth about while we were on site. I think since we had the conversation, she has broken all of the payroll liabilities up into the actual liabilities, as opposed to all being summarized into one account line, which will allow this liability reconciliation to happen much more efficiently, which is a good thing. Federal procurement, there was a little bit, so we pull samples, we test things. We tested and pulled a couple samples where we had some expenses that we found that didn't have the procurement procedures that were being followed correctly. However, I know that Elizabeth instituted new procurement procedures in April. Everything we tested since those were implemented was fine. So making steps and progress in the right direction. Student activity accounts, some untimely deposits, so cash just being sat on. Student activity accounts are often the place where cash is sat on. It's not surprising. And then there's some cash count sheets that we just recognized that weren't being consistently used, so we're just recommending if you're going to use them, you should use them throughout. And then financial policies, this is one from last year as well, where we recommend a policy for investments and fund balances.
Yeah.
You did.
Just for the record, we talked about this last time, but we passed a policy to deal with cash receipts, cash handling, and we passed a new policy to deal with all of our fund balances.
Okay, great, excellent. So overall, by really taking care of all those deficit fund balances that you guys had in FY18, put yourself in a much better position now. And so I think, we're satisfied with the audit. We think Elizabeth and her team does a good job and is making progress and taking steps in the right direction. It's always a challenge to get people to follow procedures. So I'd love to say I'll come here one day and there'll never be anything on a management letter, but that doesn't happen. There's always stuff that's not followed through with by, it can be a teacher in any school who just doesn't follow the procurement form, and if we pull that one, that would go on the list. So, but overall, from a business office perspective, we think the district's being run well. Questions?
So Elizabeth, you had flagged something, $650,000. Is that incorporated into this version now? Okay, great, thank you.
And that was just, it was really a data form error on the particular report. It didn't show the $650,000 that we allocated towards that year's budget.
Yeah. Questions?
I have a, this is a tiny one, and this is I don't understand the language of auditors kind of a question.
Okay.
Page 2, in the other matters required supplementary information, you state, we do not express an opinion or provide any assurance on the information. I read that sentence 6 times, and I could not figure out what it was that you were not expressing an opinion about. So if you, and I get that, like, there were a bunch of other times when you don't express an opinion because what you're expressing opinion, they give you something and you're not expressing an opinion on the legitimacy of what they give you in various parts.
Yep.
I could not, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were not expressing.
Yeah, just point it out to me because I just want to read it again.
Sorry, page 2.
Yep.
the paragraph required supplementary information.
Okay.
The last sentence of the paragraph,
Yep.
we do not express an opinion or provide any assurance on the information.
Yep. Yeah, so just like, really, the audit in general. So we're basically coming through to say, from a material perspective, we agree with the figures that are in the financial statements that have been given to us, and while we put this together, that's actually not part of the audit. That's another piece of the work that we do based on the information that Elizabeth provides. And so what this is saying is basically that in the supplementary information, which is Schedule A and Schedule B, so that's your revenues and expenditures, your actuals to budget comparisons. We didn't go through there and confirm, for example, that everything that's in each category is accurately reflected in that category, and that all those expenses are, every single one, necessary and required, and all those things. That's really the function of the business office and the district as a whole. So it's really it's kind of it's a CYA from an auditor perspective, to be quite honest.
We answered that for you.
Yeah, it was a nice roundabout way to put that, right?
For anybody who's ever been audited, especially in the 7 audit, you know that's pretty common. That is pretty standard. So they're not sneaking anything in that's, out of the ordinary. That's pretty common language.
Just trying to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely.
What it was you were not expressing an opinion about. So thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Yes, John?
Yeah, so, okay, well, I'll start with a good one. All right, you wrote that the our financial staff was cooperative and professional. I want to say it out loud that you thought our financial staff was cooperative and professional.
Yes, absolutely.
Does that happen all the time?
For the most part, yes.
Okay, so we're
Not
in the
100%
most-
all the time, no.
Good, so that's important. We're in the most part, it doesn't often always happen, and we are doing that.
Yep,
Thank
you
you.
were definitely doing
Is there anything that's going to be changing about accounting standards in the future or systems at the state that you think that we should be aware of, that you all are considering or thinking about?
Accounting standards are always changing, so there's new changes this year on fiduciary funds, which I'm not going to bore you with on what that's going to do.
Okay.
It's not going to do anything from your level. It's how those are classified. Fiduciary funds are your student activity accounts, basically, and really identifying if those funds that are within your student activity accounts really are fiduciary and not special revenue. That's as much as I'll say about that. From the state level, it's anyone's guess, quite honestly. So I used to be a business manager
Okay.
at ACSD.
Okay.
And so what we're seeing with e-finance, for example, is a lot of really difficult challenges switching from any software to e-finance. It is really taxing on the business office. It is taking people hundreds of additional hours to make that transition. And then we're actually having difficulty figuring out what that system can provide us to actually do an audit. That's the conversation we're currently having with the state, is to say, what this is providing is not working for us. As far as other things that changing the state, yeah, it's anyone's guess, really.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Now, after all that, I've spaced. So we have a chart of accounts as well. When you say, did you say e-commerce?
E-finance.
E-finance, that's the
is the
Power
software.
School
Power School.
section of
And they're still
of
going.
the accounting. The accounting section of Power School.
Yes.
Right, essentially? And, okay, and do we have something in the budget to help us with this?
We put overtime for our staff that are hourly in the business office into the budget, some. There are many school districts that are talking about needing double what we put into the budget for their conversion to this software.
And we can't kill our people doing this either.
Right. Well, if you got two people who are salaried, we don't get paid a dime more if we work.
I mean,
So there's two people that will just be working tirelessly to get it done without being paid.
I think when we throw around the word unfunded mandate, it's kind of a hard thing to really grasp onto. But this is an exact example of a mandate from the state that costs us as a district and our taxpayers. So,
And as a reminder, the CFOs in all of the districts across the state recommended a different software. So that the majority of schools were already using and had had very good, experiences with. And the state opted for the e-finance. And from what I recall, it wasn't even built. The platform wasn't entirely built.
It's a software that was used in other states for different functions. It was owned by another company. It was bought by PowerSchool, and they've been basically building features into it to basically make it accommodate Vermont school business finance solutions. Does that sound right?
Yep. Sir, do you have anything to add about that? E-finance?
Ron?
You have anything to add about e-finance?
The camera's over here.
gotta come up there.
So I heard the discussion on e-finance, and you don't want my opinion based on the last place I just came from, like 2 hours ago. So there's some struggles with e-finance for sure.
Yeah, maybe we do. And so when you say the state didn't listen to our gosh darn business managers, completely ignored them, the state is the agency of education.
Right.
Because they're the ones that made that.
Ignored them. That wasn't what I said, but it's the gist of what I said, yes. And yeah,
Well, we did ignore them.
Well,
yeah, there were reasons.
there was an RFP done, and there was reasons why they felt that the company that was one of the bidding companies that the vast majority of school districts in Vermont currently used didn't supply all of the necessary information that was requested in the bid. Basically, that their bid was not complete, that it didn't supply all of the information. So there were reasons why they chose the other bidder, not necessarily just because of the price or the software itself, or they had reasons why they chose that particular software and reasons why they didn't choose the other one. So I don't know as it's as much as not listening to the business managers or the other school districts as just basically saying that the bid RFP was not fully useful for their information purposes.
And remind us the deadline for this transition?
It's
The
not
deadline.
this coming July, it's the following, July 1st. We are in group 7, which is supposed to start converting though this coming July. We're supposed to start the process.
So a 1-year window to complete it.
Yep.
If I understand what you said correctly, after we convert, if you come in to do the audit, you're gonna have problems because the information that you need isn't there in the form you need it.
The state has said that they're gonna get it.
Oh, yeah, right.
So timely.
That makes us feel
Oh.
confident.
I have just a couple of other.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, so I just want to make sure about a couple of things. In addition to the couple of internal controls that you mentioned, you have no other concerns about our internal controls, other than the one that you mentioned about cash handling and the procurement, which we corrected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So when we came through and did our test work, those are the things that came up.
No concerns about our control. Do you have any concerns about, through our financial statements, the way we do contracts, how we disclose our information, about the district's goal to be transparent? Are we transparent?
Are you transparent? I don't know what the definition of transparent is with the state.
Okay.
So that, I'm not sure that I can answer that.
Well, are we following the appropriate systems to be able to share the information we need to share with the public, according to your eyes?
Well, in my eyes, I'm looking at your financial figures. So I'm coming in to say, you say you have accounts receivable of $430,000. Do I agree with that? That doesn't really have anything to do with being transparent to the general public, I guess. That to me is that's a different field, I would call it.
I'd come out and answer the question. We see no reason why you're not transparent.
Thank
for
you.
sure. We've seen nothing that says you're not transparent.
Thank you. And then, here's the last one. We talked last year, we have in the past, about cash flow, about having money on hand to be prepared. We had a long conversation about this last year. And there was talk, there was like a recommendation that we should be holding essentially $1 million or something like that as a district. What about that this year?
It was Bill. It was Bill Ross.
That was Bill?
Yes.
So a couple of things like that.
Because that's
Like
big.
as a fund balance reserve,
Yeah,
basically.
so there's a specific statute in the state of Vermont that says what you can keep. And if you keep, basically if you keep that, that there's, or more than that, there's a statutory protocol on what you have to do. And the statute's crystal clear that you've got 2 years to either use it for tax relief, or use it for budgetary purposes in a future budget, or use it to transfer into a capital reserve account. So the statute's crystal clear on what to do that. We see nothing, for this school district that basically says that you're not in compliance with that statute,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Cash flow is different than cash balance.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm saying, last year, there was a conversation with the auditors, which were you all,
Yep.
right? And the conversation.
Bill's not here, but I'll
Yeah,
speak.
the conversation was to protect yourself against future difficulties with cash flow.
Right.
We should have a fairly large reserve, and we all were kind of blown away by that because we didn't really know what to do
I
with it.
think they said minimum 600,000.
Right, some school districts, so for instance, your capital funds reserve accounts that you set aside, that you have to, have voter approval to do so. The one that we have on the ballot this year for a health insurance reserve account is similar. You're basically setting aside funds for those moments where your budget is not adequate to cover unexpected or unforeseen expenditures for those particular agreed upon items. I do know there's a few school districts who have, I don't know what they call them, but basically it's a reserve account it's expenditure reserve
Ed
account,
fund, ed
basically to
reserve.
stop them from having a
Like
deficit.
an emergency reserve.
Right.
So
Just a
we'll get
generic
there.
education
And I'll
reserve,
get there, because
right?
Bill and I actually talked about this.
And I think
last
that's
year,
where Bill
and
was
maybe
going.
This was the place. So there's the state of Vermont, and we're very familiar with Vermont, we're very familiar with Maine statutes, for sure. But the state of Vermont's one of the only states that I've seen where a school district can run a deficit and say, here you go, municipality, you're gonna pay for this, and we'll even finance it over 3 years. There's a statutory mechanism to do that. I don't think anybody wants to do that. I am sure that this district, back before you consolidated, I can speak to this. You were in a deficit situation.
Yeah, I guess we were.
So you gotta remember where Bill was coming from, and basically said, let's not let history repeat itself again, with this school system. So for sure, having some kind of a contingency plan to build up, so you're not just immediately running a deficit and saying, okay, municipality, here's the deficit for your school district, pay that bill. That's not a position you guys want to be in the school board, and I'm sure Bill probably said, let's put some firewalls in place to make sure we don't have to do that again, because that happened to you, I'm gonna say 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You were in that situation.
Thank you very much.
But we still do not have anything set up to do
No,
that.
we don't.
We don't have that education reserve. We will have the health insurance one if it's voted in. We do have capital reserves. We do not have an education reserve.
Yeah.
Just probably a quick question. Does this report fulfill all the A133 needs, or is there an additional set of documents related to that side of the audit?
No, this fills all the 11.
That's all I needed to know. Thanks.
Other questions?
There was an email, and forgive me for coming in late, it's been a long day, but there was an email that I got this afternoon from a concerned citizen, for lack of a better way to say it, that raised some questions. I didn't have time to raise all the email, but I volunteered, at your request, my services as a sounding board. I really didn't see where she was coming from on her statements and this transparency, but, but I have no reason to believe that this district's not transparent. And if you want me to talk to this individual directly, there's nothing to be hidden, here at this district. And I would say for the past 4 years, even through this whole consolidation through this consolidation process, this district has been nothing but transparent, to the point where, it's fixed a lot of problems. And I just don't want to see this district regress and go back there. That's not a place that nobody, and I don't know how many board members were there during that dark, time, but I don't want to go back there. And we were part of that process too, to get here to this day. So if there's some issues about transparency, about how you do things, I'd like to certainly leave no doubt before we walk out of this room. And if there is some doubt out there, I'm more than happy to raise my hand and say I'll talk to whatever individuals that need to be talked to, for sure.
Thank you. What, could you speak to our staffing in the business office and whether that's appropriate?
Well, you've definitely gone through some transition in the past 3 to 4 years for sure. And I would even say you've gone through some transition in the past year, with some of your roles. I always say it's key to have complementary roles, and I definitely think you've got a great 1-2 punch, at your school system. And I think that you've got some new people, from what I understand, in other positions. I just don't know where you're at, for that. But here's what I'm sure of: you're not overstaffed. I'm sure of that with a district of your size, for sure. So, and I would defer to your business manager and superintendent on certainly their levels of staffing. There's plenty of barometers out there, but just don't take your neighborhood school system and say because they've got a business office of 5 or 6 people and they do it this way, don't go use that for your blueprint, make it yours. You just redesigned your whole blueprint 3 or 4 years ago to make it yours. Don't regress. So, but I don't think that you're overstaffed for sure.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Anything else that you guys want to?
Listen, I'm glad I got here late. Did I miss anything?
You walked us through. Great, thank you very much.
Yeah,
for all
thank
that.
you.
Excellent, thank you.
Drive safely.
Yeah.
Yes.
You could now, that'd be yours.
All right, great. That brings us to board education. We have proficiency-based learning update and student assessment results. Is this, it's all in one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Student assessment is the
results?
second
That's second,
report.
okay. So
The
first,
exciting report is right now, 'cause
Okay.
you get to hear from educators and students, but then
Excellent.
it'll be just me.
okay.
But I have some fun visuals.
All right, so proficiency-based learning update, and I'll let you do the introductions, Violet.
George, do you wanna resituate? You've got it right there. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Violet Nichols. I'm the Director of Learning and Technology for the district. I'm going to open up our presentation this evening, but it gets really exciting when you get to hear from the team of educators and of students this evening. So you all have heard about proficiency-based initiatives at the high school and middle school from Stephanie and other folks over the last few years. So I'm going to open up by just talking about what's new, and give a little bit of a district-wide perspective. I think that this is one of the biggest changes, so I'm going to speak to a systems focus. And when I say systems, I'm referring to pre-K through 12. Being the Director of Learning and Technology, my lens is really connected with student assessment results. Some of you just heard Sue talking to me about that. That'll be a report that I'm delivering next. And I cannot uncouple that from teaching and learning and professional development. So from that lens, I've been doing some work with the high school leadership teams. If anyone is a Game of Thrones fan, we lovingly call what I refer to in my board report as the steering committee for the leadership team. If I revert and call it the small council, that's what I'm referring to. So they're a steering committee. Yes, I did not name it. That was Stephanie's genius. So this steering committee really meets for 2 hours a week, and they develop agendas for the leadership team, who acts as work groups and is a much larger team. So early on in the fall, we started learning about statewide proficiency-based learning and some other districts, and we've all been hearing news, and it's been brought up at board meetings, and you all have had questions about it. And we as a team thought, we have some pretty good systems in place. Our transcripts are in good shape, and we've got a school report that is also is something that colleges and universities are accepting. We're not having some of the issues that some other districts are having. But we also said we're noticing huge areas of improvement really surround communication. And a lot of that had to do with communication with our students and with our staff, as well as feedback that we heard in board meetings. So what we tried to do, make a plan. The small council sat down in the fall and decided on, with this idea that we'd focus on student-centered systems of teaching and learning, right? So when I say proficiency-based and student-centered teaching and learning, I'm grouping those together. What does this involve? It's a multi-year professional development focus. Again, we cannot uncouple teaching and learning from professional development and assessment results. It's all tied to our continuous improvement plan, and you'll get to hear more AOE mandates on that later on from me. Those don't stop. And then we fund it through the consolidated federal programs, which are grants that I write. So that's kind of the rationale for my involvement with this team. Pre-K to 6, we're focusing on student-centered learning for the first time. It's exciting. It's tied to the work we're doing in the middle school and in the high school. Right now, we're really focusing on supporting educators and students through reconfiguration. We've begun to look at what that looks like. We've got a middle-level task force that Sheila has developed, and it's being led by 2 principals. We're focusing on content, on pedagogy, on brain-based research, and really looking at building capacity and empowering teachers, empowering educators. For grades 7 to 12, we've developed this plan that I was starting to reference. So we came together and we said, what are the priority needs for our system for improvements for proficiency-based learning? So we developed this doc, and I'm gonna open this and show it to you. It's embarrassing, but I'm showing it to you because I want you to see that it's not a final polished presentation. I haven't made copies of it to hand out. This is a working document that is used for the small council, our leadership team's steering committee, to guide the work of all of the leadership teams. So this document has identified initiatives and then timeframes for communication, who's focusing on what. The real focus here was thinking about our educators and our students and how can we tighten up communication in those groups and systems. Everything from starting professional learning groups where focuses are on norming student work together or continuing to build learning skills. These are all work that teachers have engaged in. So I share that to say there's a plan for the work that we're doing, and it is, let's see. Did I give you a new presentation there? No. Skipped ahead.
There we go. I'm going one ahead. So that document is really driving the work of the leadership teams right now. And it's connected to the district leadership teams and to all of the leadership teams through these focuses. Key structural features, again, communication, prioritizing work that we're doing, looking at who's tasked with what's the timeline, what work is to be done. Some of the key focuses are increasing technical knowledge for educators. I mean, we've implemented this system of proficiency-based learning, and we've acknowledged that this is technical work and there needs to be ongoing support for our educators, and providing time and space for that to happen during early release days, during in-service days. So fine-tuning of procedures and then capacity building of our educators. So I'm going to let you know, also it does connect with our education quality standards. So, that's, we linked, the first thing is the same link. You'll get that twice. All right, I will turn it over here. EQ, you're gonna hear me talk about education quality standards later as well. Stephanie and I were just talking about how we have a nice overlap on that.
And I do just ask too, because this evening you're gonna be hearing such a broad variety of information on proficiency-based learning, and it'll be really different information than you've ever been presented with before, if you could just hold questions until the end, because each slide is kind of unique, and each presenter has decided to come and present a piece of proficiency-based learning that they feel they can speak to in their classroom. So you're gonna get a broader variety, I think, than ever before, so enjoy.
So I got to tell you, I'm thrilled to only be addressing you for one slide here. It's nice because many of you have had me overstay my welcome and do in-depth presentations. So I will draw your attention to a presentation I did at VUES last year around PBL. And that presentation, I think only Keith, Brad, and who else is new? Bill, I think, would be the only members that weren't maybe on the board at that time. But that presentation was basically around the intersection of Act 77 and the educational quality standards and our implementation of proficiency-based grading. I'm not going to go into it, but I did link the presentation here if you wanted to go in again. And we talked a lot about the shift from traditional grading to proficiency-based grading and why we believe that's really the best way to show student learning. The educational quality standards, Violet referenced those. I do want to talk a little bit about them because they really define the work that we're doing, and specifically this is about the title of the slide is proficiency-based graduation requirements. We're not really referring to them anymore as proficiency-based graduation requirements here. A lot of schools have adopted their own language. Frankly, we've adopted a term of VUHS learning expectations because it's not just about graduation. It is about proficiency, but we want that attainment of proficiency to be evidenced throughout our system. It's also an acronym that doesn't start with a P, which is really, really nice because everything else starts with a P in this work. So the VUHS learning expectations are linked on the website, and the educational quality standards define that we have to address standards in all the content areas: English, science, social studies, math, health, PE, the arts, and I may have missed one in there, as well as transferable skills. And those transferable skills vary in definition, but they are commonly communication, problem solving, critical thinking, self-direction, and those sorts of things. VUHS's learning expectations, and I have just going to refer to my notes here, are in the 6 content areas that I just listed, as well as our iteration of transferable skills. We also have habits of work, personal finance or financial literacy, and technology. And we've defined those as transferable skills because those are local graduation requirements, and we very much didn't want to lose sight of the fact that we want VUHS graduates to attain proficiency in the area of technology and financial literacy. Habits of work are those habits that are going to make everybody successful, and our transferable skills are self-direction, communication, collaboration, and inquiry, which is sort of a mashup of problem solving and critical thinking. So we've defined those. You can access them through the website. And those really serve as our graduation requirements. Students must attain proficiency in all those areas in order to get a graduation diploma. That verification is done through classroom attainment and the scores that if your parents here, you've seen in jump rope. But the learning expectations themselves are not actually scored. That's a smaller piece called the performance indicators. And in some areas, there are many performance indicators because they may be classroom specific or lesson specific. We're working to kind of trim those down because there are an awful lot of them and identify just exactly what we want students to know. But the learning expectations are the graduation requirements, and there's generally between 4 and 6 in each one of those content areas. So the performance indicators are what's scored in jump rope, not the learning expectations, but they combine and kind of accumulate to a score on the learning expectation. To find out what the learning expectations are, in many cases they are identified in the course syllabi, and every class or course at the UHS has developed a course syllabi at the end of last year and this year, and they're linked to our website as well. And I linked kind of the place where you would go. It's the academic area. So I hope that provides you with a little bit of background for what you're going to hear from classroom level implementation and the instruction. Sarah and Julia specifically are going to talk about what performance indicators and even smaller grain size, the learning targets, look like in the classroom, and what instructional practices are changing to get students towards proficiency in those areas. So again, I could take questions at the end, but I think Becky's up next.
We're good. My name is Becky Evil. I am a special educator at the high school. And with everything that we're thinking about, I am really excited to talk about the professional learning groups because we have formalized some of the structures that teachers need in order to, I guess, think about how iterative the work is. Like, we have to go back always. That's a part of teaching for all of time, and being able to share our passion and the heart that we bring to our work, and the PLGs let us do that. Professional development, there's really two main forms at the high school right now, and the PLGs are also happening at the elementary school, but I work at the high school, so I can speak the most to that. The professional learning groups and the department groups. So department groups are really content focused, so science department or science and mathematics departments working together to talk about learning and expectations and assessments. The professional learning groups are cross-department. So as a member of the leadership team, I'm a facilitator for one of the PLGs. We have special educators, science teachers, English teachers, math teachers, and the idea is that we're able to step away from our content area focus and really think about teaching and learning practices more deeply. And as someone who could talk about teaching and learning practices all the time, I love it. The guiding questions that we have are about collaboration. So how can we, again, think about structures that support teachers collaborating to support student learning, and then how are we using practices that we know are best practices to create those equitable outcomes. So those are the things that we focus on. There are 4 guiding questions that support the work that we do in our PLGs. And they're broadly attached to thinking about expectations or goals, assessment, how are we supporting students who are struggling, and how are we supporting students who are ready for more when they're walking in the door. So these are the questions that we think about. We mostly have, as we've been starting, we've met about once a month, and we've been talking mostly about learning expectations and assessment. Any one of these questions could be, every day. You could have really in-depth, powerful conversations about them. So for example, in my PLG, that has looked like a teacher bringing in samples of student work to get some feedback from colleagues about, like, was the student work in alignment with what she thought she was asking for. Another teacher bringing in a task, like a task sheet, and asking for some feedback about that. All the PLGs have read some articles, so we're building common language across the school and having the opportunity to talk about our practice and reflect on our practice. So that's like professional learning groups in a nutshell. I think they have some of the greatest potential, just like exponentially. The process of teachers talking together is really powerful, and I'm really excited about them.
Thank you.
So hi everybody, I'm Julia Beerworth, and I am a second-year teacher here at Virgins. I'm thrilled to be teaching here. I love it. I was at CVU prior to coming here, and then worked at a collection of different private schools. So I've been teaching for 11 years. So what I'm going to be going over today is basically reviewing how are clear academic expectations made to students And then how is student progress measured? So some components of proficiency-based learning. And I'm going to do that through the lens of just my class that I'm teaching, which is Modern Citizenship. So one of the classes I'm teaching right now. So as Stephanie mentioned, all of the teachers have been working on creating a course syllabus for their classes, or syllabi, depending on how many classes you're teaching. So this is just something that I give out to the students on the first day of class, and I don't know how to scroll down. There we go. Great. So these are some expectations for the year-long class. So students are provided all of the scales that we're using in class to measure progress, and then also the proficiency indicators. So in Modern Citizenship, I'm using the learning expectations of the global, the C3 framework, and in combination with the transferable skills at VUHS. So what better way to tell you and show you about how students, how students are understanding this than to have the students explain it themselves. So I'm really lucky to be able to have 3 of my students, our students, come up here and share their experiences and their learning with all of you. So on a school night too. So let's give them a round of applause. So Becca.
Hi everyone, I'm Becca. So I'm going to be talking about how Julia makes her expectations really clear when we're in class. So every day when we come to class, on the board, Julia always has the daily notes, which has the agenda for the class and the purpose. So that's what it looks like every day. This is just an example from when we were talking about the Holocaust, which is our unit right now. And then we also, before every unit, we have a KUD, which is really helpful because it kind of just goes over what we're going to be doing that unit. So the K is for know, what you'll know at the end of the unit. The U is for what you'll understand at the end of the unit, and then the D is the do. So an example of something I did, so I made a picto chart. This was earlier in the year, and it was about a current event, and I chose to do the Haiti crisis, and pretty much, like, we had a ton of formatives before. Like, I love that we have formatives because it's like practice for the summatives, so like I know what I'm expected to have for when I do my final one. And so like we also have a ton of different options of different ways we can present the information, which is really nice. But I chose a picture chart, which was a media creation, and that can also be transferred like into the transferable skill of technology. So yeah, that's what I like, is we have a ton of different ways, and we also get feedback, and the expectations are really clear.
Yeah, so this is a media creation is what we call the, like at the classroom level, they see a scale that says, can you use a combination of text and images to visually express your understanding? And then we use different platforms, so they get to practice, using PictoChart or blogging or other media forms. So they, the formatives are there as a practice, so they don't get, it doesn't hurt their grade, so that they can practice it, and then for their summative, they have a bigger project where then they're able to choose. And thank you. Yeah. That's great. And now we'll have Jordan come up and talk about how student progress is measured and supported in a classroom, what that looks like.
Hi everyone, I'm Jordan Kimball. I'm an 11th grader and I'm in Julia's Modern Citizenship class. So basically, student progress is measured with our formatives and our summatives. So first, before we're given our summative for our unit, we practice with formatives, which is really helpful because we get to basically practice on what we're going to be graded on, so we know exactly how we should do it, and we get feedback on that, which is awesome. I use Julia a lot in class for like one-on-one check-ins, because basically you get to ask her how you can improve before you're graded on your big summative, which is obviously counts more than your formative. So this I did earlier in the year during the Democratic debates. I focused on Julian Castro, which I didn't know about before. And I, like Becca said, I made a pictochart basically about him, and I got feedback from Julia on how I could improve it, and it worked out pretty good. And then I got to share this with my classmates in a pretty cool way. And I really like doing this pictochart. You get to choose like how you want to do it. You can do a Google slide, or you can do a pictochart, or just like any way that you are best at describing what you learned. Oh, I also, this was a more recent unit that we did. We got to pick a topic that we wanted to learn more about and create a media piece on it. And so I chose marital rape. And instead of doing a pictochart this time, I used Blogger, which is a blog app that you can use yourself. And it was really interesting because I'd used this in elementary school, and then now that I'm older, I got to use it again. And it worked out a lot better.
They got to comment on each other's blogs
too,
which was great. So they had some feedback from their peers, and all these issues came from that. I gave them like a political website that's allsides.com, and it has a bunch of different topics that are pretty controversial that they can then choose and explore and do research on.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Ben. Now, Ben is not in my modern citizenship class. Ben is in my was in my debate class. It was a semester class that I taught. So he'll talk a little bit about, also we use transferable skills in this class.
Yes, so what I'll be focusing on is a Harkness discussion in our class. So a Harkness discussion is a student-based and student-led discussion about a specific topic. In our case, the two topics that we focused on were, is NASA worth the money that we spend on it, and sort of interstellar travel, and then meat versus a plant-based diet. So that's what it could look like in a class. So, oh, okay. Well, before we were given, so we had a formative and then a summative on this. Before we had our first formative, then we were given a task sheet, which we obviously cannot open. But it shows the purpose of that, and the skills that we're being assessed on. In this case, our communication transferable skill, and then also sort of what the expectations are and what specifically we'll be assessed on. And then we're also given, at the beginning of the discussion, we are given in our case it was an article about the topic, and then we had to read that and create a few questions about that, which we would then discuss amongst ourselves with Julia being on the outside and assessing us as we were doing that. So it was entirely student-led and entirely student-oriented, and a great way of assessing our communication skills.
And Ben had a great video clip on our learning Instagram page. So I've asked permission for all the students who I have on my Learning Virgins, if you want to follow it on Instagram. But I promised I wouldn't show it in front of all of you. But it was great. It was a clip of the Harkness discussion in the classroom, and it is really awesome to see them. We practiced it a couple times in modern citizenship too, but it's different than a Socratic seminar because that's generated by the teacher, and the teacher provides essential questions, and Socratic Harkness discussions are very much student-centered, but the teacher provides the resources and the support structure needed to understand the content, and then they generate the questions. So it was really cool to see. You can always follow Learning Virgins if you all have Instagram and comment on that. So thank you. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the students again for sharing.
So I'm taking sort of a step back, and what do the teachers do behind the scenes to get ready to do some of the stuff that Julia was talking about. And so in every department, work like this is being done, but I can speak specifically for the science department. My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm a science teacher and the STEM department chair. And one of the things that every department has come across is the fact that with the national standards, oftentimes there are too many to create an assessment practice that allows every student to have multiple opportunities to show that they're proficient. And so how do we then pare those down or couple them together in a meaningful way. So just as an example, an NGSS standard could say, use a model to illustrate how photosynthesis transforms light energy into stored chemical energy. That's one of over 20 in biology alone. And so if you have one year-long class that meets every other day for biology that's required for graduation, there's no way that you can get through 24 specific content standards on top of transferable skills in a meaningful way where students get to show multiple times that they know what they're doing. So we as a department decided to go with a more thematic texture to our learning in terms of our graduation standards or learning expectations. And so what this would look like under our system is, instead of that tiny little nugget of an NGSS standard, it would be under energy and focusing on the transformation of energy. And so the in-class example would be that students can demonstrate that energy exists in many forms, yet is neither created nor destroyed. They can show that as energy flows from one form to another in photosynthesis, it is transformed from light energy to chemical energy through a series of steps. So we've taken the important content but tied it more to a theme. So that means that students get to talk about energy in a variety of ways in a biology class, but not only in a biology class, they get to do it in a chemistry class, in a physics class. So energy comes back over and over again. And if we write them in such a way where students demonstrate, that opens up the teachers to then pick the transferable skill that they want to tailor that content with. So if I don't want them to model about photosynthesis, but I want them to communicate about it in a specific way, I can now use our transferable skills to tie those together. Oh, geez, sorry. Thank you, save me. And just so you can see sort of like just how messy this work can be, some people suggested maybe I tidy this up, but I wanted you to feel what I feel as we try and do this. So through the middle are sort of the big topics in science: biology, physical science, earth science. The numbers in parentheses are the individual NGSS standards under each of those topics. So again, trying to teach 24 things in one course, you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it well, and you're not going to be able to give kids multiple opportunities. So what we have in yellow are our science standards or themes. There's now only 6. That's much more manageable. Kids have multiple opportunities in a variety of courses to show those things. That doesn't mean all 6 will show up in every course, but more than probably 2 or 3 will show up in every course, and based on the requirements for graduation, students will get multiple opportunities in all 6 of those. And then we can wed them to whichever transferable skills best fit either our teaching style or the course and the content. And so this is sort of the background work that the teachers are trying to do. This, Becky used one of my favorite words, iterative. I can speak to the fact that after 15 years of working here and 10-ish years of sort of doing this work and then really doing this work, that we had a grain size of the NGSS standards, we had a grain size bigger, we had a grain size in between, and it's really just trying to, I think the Goldilocks effect. Like, we just want to find something that's just right, and we're not completely there yet, but I think we're now on a path that feels more reasonable for teachers, and I think starts to make connections and really give students multiple opportunities to show that they're proficient. Thank you. Sorry.
Sarah, we feel your pain. Some of you have seen my pain with students.
Hi everybody, my name is Christine Kirkcaldy. I'm going to talk about the Communicating School Redesign Group. We're a group of youth and adults that meet in my room Fridays during callback. And our mission is to, Una, you're here. Our mission is to be able to better understand and to better communicate the changes that are happening at VUHS and in Vermont as well, as far as school redesign and learning and teaching. So one of the things we did, or what we've been doing, we developed a survey to gauge understanding and gauge perceptions of the Flexible Pathways Initiative, aka Act 77. We have administered that survey to middle school, high school, and the faculty staff You're up soon. What we did, though, in the meantime, was what the 3 sets of data that we collected, we took a retreat day, locked ourselves in my room, and led by Harry Frank from the Up for Learning group. I don't know if you folks have heard of it, but it's been in Vermont for quite a while now. Yeah, this is a very touchy mouse. I will let you find that later. And he came and guided us through the day so that it was a structured and thoughtful kind of day, and we weren't just looking at things not knowing what to do with them. Through this process, we ended up coming up with some questions to help us guide our next steps as a group. What did we notice? What strength or strengths surfaced as we looked through the data and came out of our data analysis? Because you don't just look at it and say, oh, look at how many people said this. You start thinking about the causes and the root analysis. What area of concern or what area of growth to build public understanding and support for changes surface also from our data. So we, again, spent a long and thoughtful and kind of exhilarating day together, and we had some light bulb moments, which was neat. And then at the end of the day, we had some team planning time and started talking about some of our next steps. And we will be meeting again, not this coming Friday, because it's the one right before break, but after break, we'll meet again and start taking some steps towards our next steps. I just wanted to share some of the things we did. Here's one of the responses. This is one of our questions in the survey was, successful learning is the result of an active partnership between students and teachers, both engaged in shaping the learning process. And then we took and looked at how it came apart. So that because it's kind of tiny for you guys, the blue and the red, blue is agree, red is somewhat agree. So we're feeling pretty good about people feeling on the same page about something like that, that it is a partnership in learning. And then another one that brought some light bulbs were student learning will be improved by giving them options to fill graduation requirements both within and outside of the classroom. And again, the blue agree, the red somewhat agree. So there's certainly for the high school students, but for everybody involved, there is a little more education and learning about what would that look like and how should we talk about that. One of the interesting questions came from a comment that somebody made, I think it was a student made, when we were looking at another graph, and she said, wow, teachers believe in students more than they believe in themselves. How did you interpret the they?
That's what I was asking.
That's what happened. Some people in the room thought they meant the students. Others in the room thought they meant the teachers, and that led to a really great discussion and a talk about, we need to make sure that the communication is clear between everybody involved. But that was one of my favorite moments of the day. And here I am again. I'm going to talk to you about the Flexible Pathways Handbook. I've been working diligently, as these two can attest. Can you look at this section? I am not sure. But I wanted to, under guidance and through the school counseling office, bring together all of the amazing opportunities and flexible pathways that we do offer in one place. So the creation of a handbook became that vehicle or that tool. In that, we're going to do procedures and processes to try to figure out if I want to do a community-based learning, what steps do I need to take? If I want to do dual enrollment, who do I talk to? How do I do it? So we've got, I don't even know how many pages. It's still in draft form, so I did not link it because I want to make it nice and tidy. And then the other thing is to address the availability and the opportunities for access, because equity is a pretty important piece in flexible pathways. And so making sure that we are holding to that. And I did, and can you run the little mouse? This is also in draft form, but I did try to create a flow chart so that we could see how many different opportunities and how many ways we can get them to overlap for students. For example, here, if a student is doing a community-based learning opportunity and they really are enjoying it, or it sparks some other interest or new idea, they can turn that into an independent study. And we have pathways and contracts and all sorts of ways for students to do that. It's not replacing anybody, it's actually bringing everybody to the table and having people work together more closely, and again, in a partnership for learning. And it does at the bottom, because it mentions also our partners in learning. Here, where it says link, one doesn't exist yet, I haven't gotten that far, but this, is at least not a pretty flow chart, but a flow chart to show the many opportunities for flexible pathways that we do offer here. And that's it. For me.
Thank you. So at this point, we'd like to invite you to ask any questions. We'll have a panel here of folks. If you want to ask a broad question, we can kind of just jump on that. We'll open it up to you all at this point.
I have a question. You said you're working on the flexible pathways handbook to give to students. When will students get that? Because we are supposed to sign up for our classes by February 14th, which is this Friday, and already have our class information. So when will students get that, especially considering when you're thinking about your classes now?
So all of those opportunities that I am compiling in the handbook already exist and are in your course of studies program.
So they're not going to be more defined with pathways than the handbook already has, because the handbook is kind of vague.
There'll be a bit more clarity of the steps to go through.
Because students have to go through those steps starting now.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. It's a lot easier as someone who's...
Yeah. As someone who is signing up for your CBL, that doesn't start until August of 2020. You don't have to do anything except sign up for the CBL, for example.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, as someone who has tried to do independent studies in the past and had things not work out because of the lack of necessarily clear pathway that's been defined, a clear pathway, when will students get that?
So the pathway starts with the meeting with your school counselor. In every case, it starts with the meeting with the counselor. They are the best ones to start that. You bring your ideas to them, and they are basically charged using this handbook and other people too to help you shape and define the processes that you need to do. But most of those opportunities will involve a student contract that involves the parent, making sure that the goals, the evidence has been defined, and which of the learning expectations you are hoping to meet through that work. So.
Yeah, that would be nice if that could kind of, because most students sort of know to go to your guidance counselor, but I've talked to several students who've gone to their guidance counselor and been told, I don't have enough information at this time to give to you. So it'd be really like, when are students getting that book with like X, Y, and Z, a clear defined path?
So start with your school counselor.
Can I actually jump in on that? I have a comment and then I have a couple questions. My comment is, as the parent of a senior, I hope this will be, on the same thing, linked to the student handbooks so that this becomes visible in the future to parents. And I really deeply appreciate that this handbook will become something that's available because these flexible pathways have not, to Una's point, have not been as visible as we would hope that they could be. So I wanted to say that's great. I'm really appreciative.
And then the super cool thing about it is that it's almost, it needs more eyes. It needs the leadership groups to look at it, or teams to look at it. But it will also have live links. So when Una says, I want to do an independent study, she can click on the content, table of contents,
And it'll help.
right to the independent study. It will have the process, it will have the contract, it will have the goal setting sheet.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to reiterate, the school counselor is the first, I hate to use the term gatekeeper, but their job is to make sure students are meeting their graduation requirements. So it is really important that it starts there. We're not circumventing that. They'll have this information too, but that information will be shared. So it hasn't been as clear as it needs to be, but that's the goal.
So we're
And the other piece,
Will it officially be made clear if students are signing up for classes now?
So actually, could we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So the first question that I have two questions if that's okay. The first question is, I was curious if you could speak about how professional learning groups are working at the elementary school level, and if they're working across the schools to norm what's happening at the multiple elementary schools. And I think Violet may be the best person to speak to that.
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to this. So PLG's professional learning groups are happening, as you know, and as you heard about this evening from Becky, at the 7 to 12 level. One of the, you keep hearing me talk about cohesion and coherence, and so part of having a system where we're building collective efficacy, because we know that that's the most important indicator of teacher success, which is student success, so is to provide these times for educators to come together, but within really structured ways. So at the elementary school, at the elementary level from pre-K to grade 6, we're doing a few different things. From grades 3 to 6, groups are formed of classroom teacher, they're grade based. So there's a grade 3, 4, 5, and 6 group. Those are all co-facilitated by an educator and by an administrator. That was really important in its design so that we have principals. I'm facilitating the grade 3 group, for instance, with Melissa Haggett, who's a teacher. So, and then we have all of the elementary principals are each co-facilitating a group with another teacher of that grade level. That was important in its design so that administrators and educators are on the same page about best practices. That work is focusing on deeper learning, essentially student-centered practices. Last week when we had an in-service, we focused on student voice, choice, and agency, for instance. These are not unlike topics that are being discussed at the middle and high school groups as well. One of the most unique features, again, by design, is that we have, say the grade 6 group has all of the grade 6 classroom teachers from across the district, also special educators, para-educators, art teachers, all of the educators who are interacting with students. So we're trying to create common language, common experiences for students, and common pedagogy, which is all based in brain-based research. At the K-2 level, this year, educators are working on Orton Gillingham, classroom educator. That'll flip-flop next year. It's a fantastic brain-based program. So next year, that'll flip-flop, and the grades 3 to 6 educators will have that work tailored to those grade levels, which is different than the K-2 program. And likewise, the K-2 educators will experience the PLGs focusing on deeper learning this year. And I think that pretty much pre-K is working as a team. They're kind of their own, pre-K is in many ways, they're connected, and yet they have different standards. For instance, I mean, we talk about Common Core state standards. They have VELS, the Vermont Early Literacy Standards, come to mind, for instance. But they also have the ability to meet as a full team. So that includes the classroom teacher, who's their director. That includes special educator, the SLP when she's available. There's as well as para-educators. So, you know, that team, we try to keep the teams as whole as possible. And when I say team, I mean really keeping together grade bands in thinking about, you know, the future and what's going to come with reconfiguration. It was really important to make the decision to have teachers all working together to develop relationships this year. Those will likely end up collapsing into a 3-4 and a 5-6 model. So far, the feedback that we've gotten has shown that teachers are requesting that. The reason is that we have so many 3-4 teams and 5-6 teams. So I'm meeting with the principals at the end of this month, and we'll be talking about a way to make that work. We're hopeful that for the March date, we're gonna provide some time in those groups. I can tell you briefly about the structure of those. We engage in a shared learning block, and then we have protocol discussions, which allows new learning to be processed with some structure and all voices to be heard, as well as providing ample processing time. Those are all given to educators in advance. And then the final piece of that block is a planning block. And then each educator is tasked with something that they've tasked themselves with to bring back. For instance, we left last week with a teacher saying, I'm going to totally change this unit, and instead of anchoring it in my group teach to this vague science lesson that I haven't done before, here are my changes that are going to switch things from a teacher-centric to a more personalized model. So that focus of personalization has been really a hallmark that you'll see throughout. But educators can predict that same cycle of learning block, conversation, time for integration and planning together, and then we open the next session with a sharing of work, so work samples or processing successes, failures, elements of that work that work for them, and it's a way of sharing ideas among with their colleagues as well.
Somebody here have a question? I thought I saw. Okay. No? Okay, Bill.
I had one, but it only just barely came to my mind.
Go ahead.
This is really great. Thank you, all of you, for putting this together. I mean, I love learning about proficiency-based learning. Are we going to be talking about grading? Is there another board education about grading, or is that just something we just aren't going to cover? I'm just curious if that would have been a part of tonight, or...
That was the focus of the one that I did last April, so you were not on board then, but
right.
We can certainly do that. Again, I guess I'd want a little, clarity about what, it's also the focus of the open house presentation.
Right.
And, each year we sort of increase the depth and breadth of that presentation because we're in full implementation now, but it's certainly something that we can do in the future if the board makes room for it.
I don't know if there is an interest other than me, maybe one or two people on the board. I don't know.
I'm sure we can.
Okay, well, we can talk about it. Thank you, though. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something for tonight.
Yeah, I believe that there's a written report, and I want to say like May 18th is coming to my mind. And when the leadership team put this together, Becky, I'm going to put you on the spot. I seem to recall. So the leadership team, as I said, crafted this presentation. They said, you know what, there's so many amazing elements of teaching and learning relating to proficiency-based learning that we're not discussing because we've spent, early on front-loading a lot of information about reporting, which of course is so important, and those systems are also being continuously improved. But I thought each teacher said, we want to talk about the learning, things that are happening. So the plan at that point was to provide any additional information requested in that written report, if that would suffice. But of course, at any time, if you need more information, we're happy to provide that.
Yeah, I think you might be, oops, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
We were given like a minute on each topic, so we had to kind of keep it short, so.
Totally understood.
Grading would be like 2 minutes.
That would be an all-night presentation.
Right. A lot of great stuff. The main questions that I've heard from you is, if we go back to when we first started talking about proficiency-based grading, what we wanted to accomplish with that. Have we accomplished that? Have we not accomplished that? How do we know? How have we evaluated that? And then, are we readjusting? Or how will we know if we've met what we said we were going to try to meet when we did that? And I know that for some of you, you probably feel like you've answered these questions ad nauseum, but they're still out there. And so I'm still really confused and, confused and open-minded about it, but so for another time.
I'm going to share the assessment results with you all this evening as well.
Okay.
And so I want you all to bear in mind as you're looking at that data, that is really high-stakes reporting on proficiency-based learning, because that's the teaching model that we've been used. So you'll see those, you'll see the outcomes of these teaching styles in that data. And we can talk more about connecting that as we go in.
Okay,
but I understand that you're asking for some different pieces as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to hold up tonight. I think that obviously we'll do, we can talk about this some other time, but I do want to say I appreciate what you all did put together tonight. It was very helpful.
Lori?
Thank you, really. Steering committee / small council, is that the go-to? Is that the go-to committee? Is that the place that teachers would go or students would go, something? It's my understanding that feedback, the circle of feedback, is incredibly important to this learning. If a teacher doesn't know where to go to get feedback,
Feedback about?
whatever. I don't know, I'm not a teacher.
That a teacher is asking for feedback, or a teacher has feedback they would like to give? Either one?
Either or a student.
So the PLG, okay, well, so for teachers, the PLGs are a place that happens. Each of the PLG facilitators is a member of the larger leadership team.
Okay.
And the larger leadership team also has members who are on the small council.
Okay, and I wanted to know how often they meet, the professional
Learning
learning
groups.
groups.
We've met once a month, and then I think we're gonna have a series of 3 meetings that are gonna be closer. So I think we have 2 in March.
Okay.
We meet on usually the early release days or the in-service days, so there could be like a 2.5 hour block of time where we might do a text, then do a text-based protocol, then break, maybe regroup in department meetings, review work, and then come back in PLG. So the purpose of the groups can be slightly fluid, or the groupings can be slightly fluid depending on the purpose. So again, the PLGs are a broad range. It's middle school, high school, all the content areas. You know, for instance, what department would the driver's ed teacher be linked to, you know?
Right.
So a PLG connects those sort of very small independent departments with a cohort of peers to bounce ideas off of. We're constantly soliciting through Google Forms, so feedback on that work, and even, you know, getting information from students to the Communicating School Redesign is doing a lot of that survey work. So we utilize a lot of that survey data. But there's always room for more.
I'm really conscious of the time,
Yeah.
so I want, so the Communicating School Redesign, the mission of that, could you give, what's the mission, what's the purpose of that?
Is for us as youth and adult together to better understand and then communicate student-centered proficiency-based learning within VUHS and to our community.
Okay. And how do you get a student? What student, is it a volunteer?
Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Next year, it will meet as a class
Yeah,
in the
hoping.
regular class
Yeah.
rotation. So kids can sign up to be part of that.
It will
So,
be a
yeah.
regular
Right,
class.
so it would be in the
That's-
rotation and not during callback.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, that's fair.
Christina.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I do have one question. Congratulations, all of you. I mean, we've been climbing this mountain for a very, very long time. It feels like we're in a new world here, which is pretty exciting. I guess my short question is, how close are we to the top of the mountain? Like, where are we? Like, is it, I'm just curious, and then across all class disciplines, you know, some are, you know, I'd just love to know how close we are.
It depends on how you define the top of the mountain. I mean, we have all proficiency-based grading happening in all classes.
I get that.
That's one hill.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
based on the student
same
stuff we
results
saw
of this,
tonight.
Students, you know, we are working hard to understand and develop a broad-based understanding of what proficiency-based learning looks like in the classroom. Some classes have been doing, you know, the idea that in most classes, you're going to have a learning target on the board that's going to be addressed by the teacher, and that at the end of the class, they're going to loop backward. That's a proficiency-based element, instructional element that didn't happen 10 years ago in most classes. So that in and of itself, we think of that as just plain old teaching now, but that's one of the first elements that we do, linking assessment to standards. So, you know, what you define, the whole flexible pathways is a whole other element of that. The reason, the intersection of that is, if we're going to start promoting kids to be learning outside of this system and evaluating their work, we need a way to measure that. And that's where those, you know, identifying those learning expectations, that's why EQS was developed along with Act 77. They complement each other. So, you know, it's not going to be Julia necessarily assessing the work that a student does in her classroom. She may be asked to assess the work that a student does outside of the classroom, and we need to have the common language. So that's where those common graduation requirements come from. So I guess it depends on what the mountain is, but it's pretty exciting. And I would say that the traditional education that we've been in we never asked those questions. So, you know, was that mountain, you know, finished? I don't know.
So I just want to jump back to
it's always
iterative.
evolving.
It's I think all of our words, and that our mountain is iterative. It's always going to be changing. We're always going to be learning something new. We're always going to be realizing we have different cohort of students here with different needs. So it's like we hit a summit and then, oh, there's the next peak, let's go. That's how the work is.
Great way of thinking of it, yeah.
I think, I'm also not gonna directly answer your question, and like, when we're like 75%, I don't think we can say that. What I will say is that, so I get to see, because I'm a special educator, I see what students are working on across the content areas. There are common practices, so students have learning scales, they have learning targets, teachers are using that language and referencing those kinds of materials. So I think that some of those structural pieces are used across the board. I think that some of the teaching and learning practices and some of the things that Sarah talked a little bit about and that Julia talked about, those, like, that is, I think, the power of the PLG to be able to really have that happen, because we really ripped open the idea that, like, a teacher's in their classroom and then that's it, and they do all of that work independent of anybody else. And while I have always experienced our faculty be very supportive and open, having those structures in place, now I think we're having more conversations across teachers that is, like, what is that work? What does this look like? Like, sharing, it takes time to build up feeling comfortable being that vulnerable, because that hasn't historically been a part of teaching, to say, like, hey, like, look at this stuff and tell me what you think about it. So I think that process is happening. So, I mean, I feel like we're like suited up for the mountain and like really well on our way. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think we're gonna transition to student assessment. I know we are already really far behind on time.
All right, yeah, and I will
thank you all
truncate
for
this.
coming.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Read over B21, I thought, this is a report that I'm to deliver on professional development. And through conversation, it morphed into this, well, this is actually really the only opportunity that we have to talk about student assessment results. And that makes perfect sense because, as I said, hand in hand with teaching and learning is assessment. So that being said, the goals for today's presentation are for you all to understand that connection between policy, and we will talk about the AOE, assessment results, and then professional development. I'd also like to provide an introduction to some of the major high-stakes assessments that we're using in our district so that you can have a better idea of what you're looking at when you get to the data. So that is our next piece, reviewing of current assessment results. And when I say current, quite a lot of the data that is hyperlinked in this presentation is 2018. In some, on state databases where I pulled the vast majority of this data, anytime I had comparison data, 2018 is the most recent. So I do just want you to note that. If it's 2019, it's internal data only. And then I want to have a little bit of a conversation on implications of assessment results. We spend a great deal of energy on administering assessments. So what? Now what? What does that mean? Professional development and assessment data. You've heard me talk about our comprehensive needs assessment. This is a process that the educational leadership team, who's got members of the leadership team at all levels, we started in October having conversations about prepping that team for a data review. A comprehensive needs assessment at the time was, I say at the time because that's since changed. So that the comprehensive needs assessment is the first step in creating a continuous improvement plan. That being said, 2 weeks ago, the AOE said, hey, curriculum directors, we are totally changing this process, and we are now requiring different templates and a different process. And instead of having one continuous improvement plan for the district, we're now required to have unique plans for each of the schools. So this is great. We have a lot of data to look at. This was looking like we had the process wrapped up with the educational leadership team, and then we had a scrambling. And I met with principals and provided the same templates that they used in participation with the educational leadership team's CNA process, and we're going to now perform those at the school level as well, because there's a significant amount of increased, there's a new data template that the state introduced, and they said, and hey, it's due in a month. So when I speak with you next, which will be March 16th, the plan will be for me to then instantly submit a plan once you all have approved it. And I think we're ahead of the game in a lot of ways, in that I used the templates that they required last year. They were suggested, and this year the surprise factor was that it's mandatory. So I think we're in good shape on that. So I'm talking about the continuous improvement plan because what that does is it's a way of saying we have a formalized plan of saying here are our priorities for teaching and learning as shown by our data, as will be grant funded, right? So those are the connecting pieces. As far as assessment, we're also going to be revamping our local comprehensive assessment plan. This is something that members of the administrative team, Work Group B, which I facilitate, it's an administrative team, our interventionists and educators are all going to be working on. We have had, the state has been hosting assessment workshops this year, and they've been excellent, I have to say. And so we've sent teams of educators there to get some understanding about that process, since they'll be a part of revamping that. And of course, the idea is that we need our assessment calendar, if you will, for the district to have screeners and diagnostics that yield the information that give us information for our continuous improvement plan. So that's the process there. Professional development and assessment data, we use data at many different levels, from the classroom level to school teams. When I look at data, I look at it in two ways, vertically and horizontally. From a district perspective, it's important for me to look at trends over time, and for us to be funding grants with those priorities in mind. Many times that's a 3 to 5 year plan, rather than this year we're doing this and then we're instantly changing course. The data doesn't justify that approach. And then we're also focusing, heavily grounding the grant investment priorities in brain-based and evidence-based programs. So that those are the main focuses for the professional development work that I'm funding through grants. I'm talking really quickly to try to speed this up. So all of this is driven by policy. Sure.
Help us understand, what's an example of a grant that you went for because you saw data, we need it because of the data?
Yes, good. So I've got some hard copies that I'm going to pass out to you after you listen to me talk for a while. I'm going to give you the data when we talk about data. But what you'll see is that I can think of one. Last week, we brought a team to some professional development that focused on equity. So through the data, we can see that students who are on free and reduced lunch, who have IDEA B indicators, gender impacts student achievement data. So from that data, which is evident in every subset of our data, literally from pre-K to 12, ELA, math, and science, it's all evident that we need to focus on really making sure that when we say this continuous improvement plan goal, our first goal, high expectations, high levels of proficiency for all students, we're underscoring that all. So that equity work is, how are we working on practices that are inclusive of all students? How are we using, I'm thinking about flexible pathways, for instance. That work is directly connecting and driven by the data, which shows discrepancies in achievement results by historically marginalized populations, for instance.
And you've written for a grant for that?
That is grant money that was funded through the titles.
Okay.
That was Title IV. We have a new Title IV director at the state, so that one was creatively passed by.
That's great. That's good. That's like the
I
first
met
time we've seen
the language
connection.
fit,
Thank
which
you.
was exciting. There was equity is work that a lot of curriculum directors are working on, so we've been, swapping strategy language on that. So the state is gonna find after our approval on that they're gonna get a lot of applications with our language, which is good. It's good sharing. So policy, again, back to education quality standards, which I tried to tell you about earlier because it's on Steph's slide as well. Act 77, VT, MTSS. So the education quality standards are really the umbrella. They drive all of the policy from flexible pathways to mandated local comprehensive assessment systems. They've released the VT-MTSS field guide. Major implications of this work are that we're doing away with this language of tiered interventions. That's a tier 2 kid, phrases we're no longer using. And the approach now is an integrated approach. So we're seeing less pulling and stigmatizing of students, more integrated approaches, so stronger focus on universal instruction, partnerships, collaboration, say between special education and general education, or English language learning and general education teachers. And so the term layered would be, it's more representative of the work being done. So every student is still getting universal instruction. Maybe they need a layer 2 support as well, or what we formerly know as intensive, which would be a layer 3. A huge takeaway here is the implication that expert teaching is mandated, right? So that our teachers are experts. So when we talk about investment priorities of our educators, it's really developing them, through PLGs is one way, so that they're able to collaborate effectively with one another, and then use student-centered practices with effectiveness and with competence. And this is new. I mean, we've not, for decades we've said, this is the approach to teaching and learning, and now we've said, hey, we're really switching from a teacher-centric focus to one that's personal learning focused. So it requires a significant amount of professional development because we're asking really new and different techniques to be used in the classroom, and this is, it's important work. So let's see here. Inequities, they're evident in all of our statewide and in our local data as well. This goes from, it's evident from anywhere from classroom assessments, as we found with our continuous needs assessment, that we found it in classroom assessment data, in school-wide data, in district-wide data. It's not just us, it's statewide as well. It's nationally. I mean, these are trends that educators are grappling with everywhere. For us, it's how specifically are we going to be dealing with it. So, district structures, this is a big piece. You've heard a lot of conversation tonight about structures, systems, processes, professional development. Teaching practices can affect these inequities, bottom line, right? Act 173, essentially, if I were to boil it down, I would say it's relating to enhancing availability and equity of services, right? So I think oftentimes folks say, oh, that's a special education. It's very much important for us all to understand as an education body, right? So not just a special education, it's developing all teachers so that all students can have equal access. So again, brand new information this year, policy from the AOE, VT-MTSS, 5 major components, culture of continuous improvement. Obviously, this is a significant change, and you heard with our proficiency-based learning initiatives too, the focus there is continuous improvement. And so even if I were to say, yes, we're at the top of the mountain, we are still working on continuous improvement. So all of our systems fall under this umbrella for me.
And then decision makings for excellence and equity, it says here. So, and you see this graphic, collaboration, high quality instruction and interventions, comprehensive assessments, and a systematic approach. So these are the pieces that we're implementing, and you see them in the initiatives doc that I shared with you. It informs our leadership plan, team plans at a district level, at school levels. So these are pre-K to 12 approaches that we're not now taking within our district, which are huge. I mean, I cannot say that enough, that the changes that our educators have gone through I would say I'm going to bring it to, an accounting piece of, you heard about our business office becoming more accountable. And I think what we've really done for our educational systems is that same thing, an overhaul, a revamp, and making sure that we're in compliance with these AOE mandates. Structures to support this. This graphic really just discusses interventions. This is literacy in particular. The state usually goes to literacy, I've noticed. I'm gonna go through some of these quickly because there's a lot here. Instructional strategies. So it's this layered support piece where we have a strong tier 1 focus. We're building teacher capacity, teacher efficacy, and making sure that students all receive universal instruction in addition to any other layered supports that they may need. This is our current local comprehensive assessment plan. We've got screeners and diagnostics. All students take screeners 3 times a year. Those students who do not meet benchmarks are given a diagnostic, which is a more in-depth assessment to give guiding information oftentimes to interventionists who will then administer strategic or intensive supports based on those results. And again, we are redoing this for next year. So let's get into some assessment pieces. Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, SBAC, as we lovingly call it, because we have to make everything an acronym. They've got a few different components. We're not utilizing all of these currently. They've got a fantastic digital library, interim assessments, which we're not using, very useful for teachers to inform instruction, and then summative assessments. And that's what you'll see evidenced in the data reports that I've linked and that I'll share with you. And summative assessments, again, you heard me just answering Bill's question, that's a way that we can measure the teaching and learning happening in our systems. So for instance, in our assessment results, you're going to be reviewing evidence of proficiency-based systems. Here's the homepage to the AOE's SBAC portal, and this is hyperlinked at the top. They've got pages for students and families and all kinds of information here. I'd encourage you all to take a look at this so you can familiarize yourselves with the assessment. Testing information on the SBAC. So there are summative assessments. They're part of the Vermont Comprehensive Assessment System, currently administered in grades 3 to 9 in math and ELA. We'll also be discussing the Vermont Science Assessment. This is the first operational field test was in 2019. On some of the data, in some of the data that you'll see, there will be missing or asterisked information. It indicates changes in tests, right? So some years the grade levels have changed. Some years the name of the test has changed. Those of you who have been on the board for a long time have known that it's not always been SBAC, it's been NECAP, or there's been various high stakes assessments. And the Vermont Science Assessment are linked closely to, they're assessing the next generation science standards, which you heard Sarah referring to. Reporting, so 4 levels ranging from not meeting to exceeding. The parent reports that you all receive, which are pictured here, have a little bit of a different language. They're called claims below, at, or near, and above the standards. These are the reports that are sent home to you all. And now I'm going to, I can pass out some data reports here, but try to stay with me for time, because I'm going to give you, I want to highlight in particular one important slide here. So I am on page, let's see,
page 3. So, page 3, so 2018 SBAC ELA scores. So I'm going to draw your attention only to 2 of the 20 slides in this presentation for time's sake. And what I'd like you to look at here is you see a highlighted line that says percent proficient. Under it, you'll see FRL, that stands for free and reduced lunch. Under that, non-free and reduced lunch. Special ed, so those students who are on an educational, so not IEP, and individualized educational plan, and then non-special ed students, so gen ed students, and then we're disaggregating by male and female. So when I talk about equities, and John, when you're asking what is driving this work, these 2 slides show a few things here. And I want to also highlight the difference between, this is an ELA slide, English Language Arts. The next one will be mathematics. And it's interesting that you will find differences between the 2. So take note of that. So for the first slide here, English Language Arts, we've got, so total percent proficient for our district, 64.6. For students who are free and reduced lunch status, it's 50%. For our students who are not free and reduced lunch, it's 73% proficient. So students free and reduced lunch, 50%, not free and reduced lunch, 73%, right? So huge inequity already there. For students who are special ed, 7.1% of those students are meeting proficiency. For students who are not special ed, 76.5%. And then if we look at male students here, in ELA, for grades 7 to 8, that's what this particular slide is looking at, we have 56.8%. And for females, it's 73.7%. Okay, and you can see I've put information there for MAUSD, ACSD, and the state. I do think, and you'll see comparison data throughout my report. It's interesting to contextualize our data with those around us, right? So I don't want you ever to be looking at raw data. I want you to have other information to support your understanding of the context. All right, so now I'm going to move the next page, 2018 SBAC math scores. Again, we're looking at 7th and 8th here, multi-school comparisons. Please look again to that percent proficient line. District-wide in mathematics for 7th and 8th graders, 55.6%. If you're free and reduced lunch, it drops to 44%, 44.8. So if you're a student who's free and reduced lunch, you can expect to do 44% proficient. If you are not, you're about 61.5% likely to be proficient. So there's, that same inequity is seen. Special ed, 0% proficient. Non-special ed, 67.2. Pretty stark differences here. And then the male and female, much closer together than in the ELA. We've got percent proficient for male students, about 55%, and about 57% for female. It's interesting to see how math scores also change throughout the grades as well as ELA if you're looking at gender. So I'm going to, for now, so that's, all of this is linked in my report. I am going to.
Is this common with all rural states in the country?
I'm sorry?
Is this common with all rural states in the country? All rural states?
This being discrepancies in achievement. I have not done in-depth studies, of course, on other, it's a national trend, absolutely, yeah.
How many kids in special ed, I know, are this being based on, because it seems to be the most stark.
Yeah, that's a good question, Una. So it depends on the grade level. And of course, it's different for every grade level reporting out. In this particular sample size, I'd have to pull up my Excel sheets to see what the sample size is. I think it just gives you the total number there. Okay. So I'm gonna move us along from the data piece because I could again spend 4 hours talking to you about these pieces. Everything is hyperlinked, and I want to bring it back to assessment results within the context of policy, professional development, and linking these results. So looking at the snapshot is a state initiative where we're supposed to be given large amounts of information on academic proficiency, personalization, safe and healthy schools, high quality staffing. Do these sound familiar? This is where our 3 continuous improvement goals come from, and education quality standards. At the current, in our current state, these are not useful for informing instruction or really for looking at longitudinal data in any way. For instance, I'm sorry?
The snapshot's not useful.
Right. And the reason for that is because the data uploads have been, the state longitudinal data systems have had, they're brand new systems involving Power School. And so there have been, that's an example of a state mandated requirement that has literally created the need for full-time data managers. I mean, it's a more than full-time job, right? So, and this being new, there's incomplete and inconsistent data. So I'm not using this as a, I'll bring your attention to one in particular. It says when I did the high school program of studies analysis, one component that I would have analyzed would have been high school attendance. Well, it's no longer being tracked by the state in the version that it used to be. It's now being reported on the snapshot. And our data for that is embargoed. And when I called the state, it said it was about 80%. Consistently, we've been about 95%. And so what I was told was, this is incomplete data at this point. And the newest snapshot is now being reported that it'll be released in about 6 months. So the data is not being produced in a timely enough manner for us to be using it for real programmatic changes. Academic proficiency, though, is an important indicator. We're not getting a lot of information from here. It's saying it reports on, it'll give us a current status and then a change on that. High quality staffing is another piece reported on the snapshot. The indicators here I did find to be interesting. So properly licensed teachers, all of our teachers fall within this category. But these are some of the pieces that we're looking at here, and that in the future, I think if these are to be, if the migration between the SLDS and the snapshot is complete, I think they have the potential to be fantastic resources. So implications, this is my final slide. So kind of, what are we doing, why are we doing it, last words. So we're changing educator practice. This is so huge, and I keep saying it because we're asking quite a lot of our educators, and their work needs to be supported. Students are at the center, not the content, and that is we have taught teachers, we've trained teachers. My teacher preparatory training was content at the center, and that's no longer what we know is best practice. Right, so we have research showing what we've been doing for so long isn't working, and it's a huge shift in education. So I want to make it clear we're asking quite a lot of our educators, and we need to support that work. What are we doing here? So universal instruction is a focus pre-K to 12. I'm looking at Nancy in the back, and I'm thinking about MAP best practices. That's professional development she's participating in. That's a universal it's for universal instruction in her classroom. Equity, we have, you hear me talking about equity. What does that mean? It doesn't mean equal. When I'm talking about equity, I'm talking about all of our students, and we're saying that our goal is to be meeting the needs of all learners. Here are some categories that we can look first to: socioeconomic status, free and reduced lunch, IEP status, also IDIB indicator, and gender. So, all of these summative performance results that you'll see in my report are reported to the ESSA assessment plan. And then, kind of some last words here. Our approaches to proficiency-based learning with a pre-K to 12 focus, we're focusing on these high leverage concepts and skills. So when we're talking about learning skills, we're talking about high leverage concepts and skills. And then the biggest part of my work, and when I think about the audits that I've done to the systems at ANWSD is we've desperately needed and are now implementing, as you've heard this evening about all of the efforts we're taking, to work on aligning instruction and assessment. So that's K-12, pre-K to 12 alignment, and we need to be aligning vertically and horizontally. So this looks like everything from working on learning scales to talking about best practice, to looking at assessment data over time, to meeting, or to figure out common agreements for elementary scheduling. How many minutes of math? How many minutes of language arts? So who's getting what? You'll see huge discrepancies among elementary schools in this report too. Part of that is due to funding. Part of that is due to, when I say funding, I'm referring to grant funding. I mean, some of the schools you'll see have higher per pupil spending than others as far as Title I, for instance. And those schools are having higher levels of achievement, right? So we're seeing a connection there. Finally, summative data only provides us with part of the picture, and that's important to note. Many measures influence daily instruction, most notably formative instruction, and that's what teachers are using to inform their practice every day. And it's a way that we can be responsive to students' needs in the moments. All right.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
You are correct. We have desperately needed these types of analyses, so thank you for doing that. And thank you for giving us data in context.
Of course.
That's really wonderful to have. I look forward to looking through this. I think I'm going to not open it to questions because we were running really far behind,
Yes.
but
Thank you.
Would you be available by email if
Sure.
people have
Absolutely.
questions?
Violet,
for-
yes.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Violet. So Sheila had submitted a superintendent's report with a safety update, a congratulations on a wellness award, and an update on the middle school task force, as well as an addendum about some questions from folks in the town of Addison. Did you want to add anything? Or?
No, but I will clarify why I added the addendum, was because I've had several people ask me that question over time, like, what is the process now that we're a unified union school district? Like, if a district decides they don't want to be part, what is the process? And so it was, I included that because it kind of details what the steps are and how that would proceed. And it was a good opportunity. I was CC'd on the response from Donna Russo-Savage, so I included it in the packet. FYI.
Thank you. Good with that? Did you have a question?
Quickly,
Yeah.
when the middle school task force comes out with the action plan,
Mm-hmm.
is it gonna have like a timetable of report outs? Can it have a timetable
I
of
think that's a
report
better,
outs?
I think that's a better question, yeah. I mean, there's not a template for it, so they haven't created it yet, so
Yeah.
they've only met once. And they were to meet last Thursday, and then we had a snow day, so they gotta regroup and kind of, figure out what their next steps are, but.
I don't think it's our responsibility to tell them what to do. I mean, in fact, that's
Right.
the wrong thing to do. It's them.
Right,
figuring
and
it
if
out.
you
But
remember-
it's our responsibility to learn, and I just want to know when
Right.
to expect to get information.
So, if you look back at the charge that I provided to them, which I
Yeah.
shared with you through one of
Okay.
my superintendent reports, I broke it down into 3 phases as a suggestion. So this is phase 1, which is the learning phase. So they're gathering up input about models that and other things that might inform their practice. I mean, they're middle-level educators. They already know a lot about this, but they're trying to have an open mind and look at other models to consider. Then they have to move into phase 2, which is where they're going to be making more of the recommendations. And that would have to be in a timely way, because if there are budget implications for you all, you would need to know that. But rather than start with making decisions, who, what, when, where, why, how, right, they want to gather some information to get them all kind of on the same place. And then phase 3, after the budget season next fall is over, that's when they would be moving into planning for implementation. So getting their, throughout the process, they'll be working with their peers back in the classroom, but that would be an opportunity to really set that transition plan into motion. So just in a loose way, from a timeline perspective, those are the kind of phases and the trajectory they'll go through. They'll be doing some professional development this summer, some professional learning. We had originally identified the middle grades institutes as a great place. There may be some date conflicts with that, so I'm not really sure where that stands at this point, but you know, their intention is every time they meet to put out a blurb similar to the one that I included that's going out to the whole faculty and staff, so that everyone's kind of looped in. But that's not you know, the limit of their communication. There'll be more, but I can certainly say that as their plans take a more formal shape, to make sure to include you in that and keep you looped in. Good. Yep.
Thank you. Others?
I had some questions about the safety report, but I wonder if we could come back to these. We didn't have a facilities committee meeting last Friday because of the snow day, and it was bad driving. So maybe if we could loop back to some of that at the next facilities committee meeting, and then we could bring a report to the board.
Yeah, the intention was to share that with you on Friday.
And it was right. No, I got, and it was great. It was very helpful to see, but there's some things that I think would be helpful to come back to, but not now.
Good, thank you. All right, and Violet had even more information in her written report.
It was.
And collaborative report too, with all of the other folks submitting.
Yeah, we have, there are many pieces that fall under the Office of Learning and Technology. So at this point, I don't want to take too much time. I've already spent so much time talking to you. I guess I would say that my report highlights some of the monitoring pieces I've done. There was a high school program of studies analysis. Thank you to this woman here who did a great deal of that legwork. I'm looking over her shoulder right now. She's got it pulled up. That was one thing, you know, that we didn't highlight this evening. I do just want to mention that's the purposes of this is for internal reasons. It's to help us contextualize the assessment results that we looked at. We did have to make a lot of decisions about collapsing categories, and I also think it's important to note that it was created by an analysis of program of studies documents, which don't always accurately reflect the courses being offered at any given time. Our school district, as with others who we analyzed, were showing a menu, if you will, of courses offered, and many of those collapse or go away or are not taught, for instance, every year based on student enrollment. And let's see that, again, the purposes of that are to really think about it, to add another piece of our understanding, to round out our understanding of our assessment results, and also to look at the opportunities that we're offering our students and with the resources that we have. And in the first few pages of that, you'll notice demographic information, average teacher salary, student-to-teacher ratio, pieces of information like that. So it's just kind of an assessment of where are we, how are our peers doing, what does that look like. Lots of other exciting work going on. If there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Yes.
Just about that, I wondered why the schools that you chose, some of them made sense. The ones that were the same size as us made a lot of sense. CVU and South Burlington made less sense to me, but I'm just wondering what was the rationale behind the list that was on that particular doc.
Yeah, so Sheila and I started talking about this, and and Sheila, feel free to jump in. My understanding is that students in Addison County should not be having a vastly different educational experience than those 25 minutes north of us, and yet that is the case. And so I think it's important for us to understand the far more options and that those students are getting, and what that means for our students. So if we're not doing the work of understanding what course offerings other students in Vermont have, then we're doing our students a disservice. I think that we can get, I mean, for many reasons, I think it's important to analyze districts who are the same size, but also to get a broader state context and looking at comparatively wealthy districts, if you will, or resource-rich districts is still important, because just because we have smaller numbers doesn't mean that our students shouldn't have those options.
Right.
And I think that with more resources, there are really interesting and, I mean, totally like zombie apocalypse, you know, courses that are so intriguing. And, you know, Martha and I are reading those descriptions. We're like, we want to take this course. So I think it's a way for us to learn about really exciting course offerings that other students have, and how can we do an honest assessment of what we have with our resources.
Good. Thank you very much.
I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah, look, this is worth it. This is worth a moment here. Okay, we did not have a curriculum coordinator for a long time. And there were a couple of policies that when we talked with Joanne before, and she was just like, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. And it was like D20, curriculum development and coordination. I mean, we couldn't really even ask the question, is our curriculum coordinated? Because we couldn't really even understand it. And like I'm starting to believe for the first time I can answer yes to that question. Yes, it is coordinated in some way. And now that allows us to move to other questions like, is it coordinated in a sound way? Are the programs, I mean, we're at a different place now. It's really important.
We have a coordinated professional development plan this year. That is a celebration.
B21, the professional development, that's the first time that we have ever seen professional development and student achievement in the same paragraph. And we are at a different spot now where we can really start to ask questions about how well is it going? Because before we couldn't even tell whether it was connected or not. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Can I just build up a couple of your statements there, which you're statutorily obligated to do? So in terms of the coordinated curriculum piece, it's your obligation to ensure that. It's my obligation to ensure that. So, and then for the other piece, the connection to the funding, so that the professional development plan that Violet speaks to, when we apply for grant funding, we are signing off on that, saying that we have done the work to you know, for those federal funds to provide professional development. We've done the needs assessment, we've done the analysis, we've done all of the work to know that this is the right work, this is the right professional development. And furthermore, there's another step in there. We have to evaluate that PD and see how well we've used those resources for their intended purposes. So how do you do that? How did you do that? Void of having, but somebody signed off, right? So I'm saying, like, it was, you know, to be able to do that work correctly and well and with this much fidelity is very important work. So I'm very grateful for Violet's work, and I'm glad and thankful to the board for recognizing the significance of that position here in this district.
And I would be for building I echo all of that. I mean, we've been trying to do this work. I've been trying to do this work for 7 years. We have been doing this work for a long time, but without a sounding board, without someone who has the shared systems perspective that we do, to really help us implement this work. So I'm not saying that professional development wasn't happening, but now it's more coordinated system-wide. And, you know, Violet is there and say, you know, what about this idea? And Violet, I'm thinking about doing this. Or can you help me gather the resources in order to present this to our faculty? That's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Oh, Elizabeth. So.
Sorry, have my report. I don't have anything super special to talk about with regards to the report unless people have questions. the pieces about some of the equalized pupil numbers and things like that, changing when our book had already been published, I figure probably is better talked about under the budget presentation, if we want to wait for that and the talking points.
I mean, either way, it was a surprise. They re-verified the data at the AOE, right? And we
Yes.
lost.
We lost 5.9.
I don't know where they went.
Almost
Where did these students
6
go?
students
Yeah.
in our pupil count.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think it's important to note that it doesn't mean that the data we submitted to them was incorrect, or that the data they got from us was incorrect, or that they read the data wrong. I think it's important to say that when they review the data, they're reviewing it statewide. So all of the school districts putting their data into the AOE and then them scrubbing that data and sorting it and getting it all verified and correct can change anybody's numbers up or down, because the base of that total number changes. If any school is missing ELL students or state place students or whatever, it can affect us even if it's Rutland or Burlington, and especially those larger school districts that have the higher populations of those students. So there was no way to know, basically, that our number could change by that much. And the important thing about it is it could still change. So.
Can you explain that again? So if you submitted a clean number, you know exactly how many students and where they are, and we submit it to the state, and they come back, and there's a shift in Rutland, that affects it? Explain how that works, you just said?
The entire state is what creates the base. It's almost like scaling. Imagine a grading system, and you're scaling grades because of, you know, of the group of students or whatever in that classroom have scored all between this and this, and so you're scaling those grades. It's kind of similar to the student population of the entire state. They create the base of the ratio in their calculation on the entire state, not just on individual districts.
So it's the ratio they're changing, not
Yeah,
the number of students.
the ratio. And it's also, it's not just 1 year of data either. Even our data is 2-year average, and it's a weighted average by
It's the
particular
ratio
students.
that's causing the changes.
Yeah.
It's the ratio that's causing the change, but it's changing our equalized
Right.
pupil number
Right.
that is
Right.
used in our tax
Yes.
calculation.
Yeah.
What was the last time it changed for the current fiscal year?
After the
May?
budget.
August?
Right after we.
So-
We voted even.
No,
Last year.
Oh, last year?
August?
After we voted.
May.
After the vote from even voters, yeah.
So we can assume the possibility of, we don't know, but we can
They
assume the
said they
possibility.
won't be changed. They said they're locked in.
But there are other numbers that also change. There's the yield, there's the
There's
threshold.
other
that are
numbers that
set
could
by the
change how much your
legislature.
taxpayers end up
Right.
paying.
So the implication is that Burlington or communities that have an increase in students
Possibly a
are seeing
larger-
the numbers are going down,
Yeah.
right? The zero-sum game of
Right.
allocation.
In our case, this one, you know, last year when the number changed after the vote, our number went up. This time, when our books were already published, our number went down. So
And 5 students is a lot.
It's
a
it's
lot
almost
for
6
a
students.
lot.
It's a lot. That's a
Right.
lot. Yeah.
So I've been talking to a lot of folks, legislators, and trying to get them to fix the situation. It's not, we're trying to get them to put some sort of repair in place, and they are trying on our behalf. But we'll see.
There's a tsunami of small town legislators demanding change from Montpelier.
Well, because ours went down, but some went up.
But the trend over, I mean, the per pupil trend is still against the small towns that are losing students.
Oh, I see. You're talking almost a different scenario, not specific to this change, but just in
Well,
general.
it's
Just in
all
general.
kinds,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
related to
Just
the
in
Yeah,
same issue.
right, well, the
Right.
whole formula, I
Right.
mean, that's the broader conversation, is
Correct.
that the
Right.
whole formula is not equitable.
Right.
Right.
But aside from that surprise, everything else looked good in
Everything else is normal, as
Normal.
normal can be. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for Elizabeth?
I mean, just, this is it, like, we cut the budget, we presented a budget that cut the budget by 1.5%, or something like that?
Yep.
All right, let's just say in general, like, if you expected general inflation and we didn't cut anything, we kept all programs, we kept everything, we'd probably end up with a 4% increase. right? So we're cutting like a gigantic percentage, 5% probably. 5% or more of our budget was cut. And our taxes are going to go up, and now they're gonna go up higher. And so this is all driven because of decline of the student enrollment.
And healthcare.
Well, that would be the budget number.
That would be the budget
Well,
Yeah.
numerator, denominator, numerator's going up. I mean, I would bet outside health benefits, our budgets are flat to down.
Now, there they are, yeah,
And
right.
the denominator
Oh,
keeps
yeah, you're
dropping
right,
no
you're
matter
right.
what.
You're right.
But so the larger point is that we have done our job, and these are forces out of our, outside
What we
of
can't
our
control, we can't control.
Right.
And it's hurting us.
And it's a
We
lot.
have that as a statement in one, somewhere in our annual book, I forget which page, but basically that the only number we have control over is this one. Basically, that's the expenditure budget. And then what happens after that at the legislature or in our pupil counts is really out of our control.
or in the giant South Burlington mega campus.
Right, and actually, proposed budgets statewide for school districts are looking like the budgets are increasing an average of over 4%.
Right.
When we decreased our budget.
Good
We decreased ours.
Mhm.
What's the range of, do you have that
I didn't pull up
open?
the chart, but it was.
It's
It was
There's some-
Hannaford,
we were
there's some
the
that are a
only
lot higher
one that
than that.
decreased.
Hannaford aside, which was what, a 23%?
20%.
You know, some
Yeah.
are 12%.
12.
up,
Yeah,
12.
some of them were up 12%. I
Yeah.
think Mount Abe is probably the next closest, and they were up about 1.5%.
Next
We're-
closest to us.
Next closest to us in
Right,
terms of
and they're in a
increase or
precarious position
decrease.
as well, so.
Right,
Right.
right. And all of those numbers impact
Right.
us.
And the only thing at this point, if, pupil numbers don't change, which it sounds like they've basically, as Sheila stated, they've said that the numbers are frozen at this point. There again, last year, they said they were frozen and they still changed. But all things aside, the only two things that could really help as far as the tax rates are concerned are if the legislature chose to increase the property homestead yield or increase the threshold that is set, because that would save us from being over the penalty.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Could happen.
Students.
All right, I guess I can start out. So just sort of some general updates from, or just happenings, I guess, with the school and the student body would be some smaller things. Class scheduling for next year is beginning again, with students starting quickly to choose their next classes. And with this has been the introduction of a few new classes, including a racial and social justice class, as well as, I believe, an exploring professions class. And with that, PLP work has also started back up again this year, and with that has begun work on end-of-the-year presentations that all students will be creating and presenting. And so for the juniors, I can't speak as well to the sophomores or the seniors, but for the juniors, this means essentially what we'll be doing is telling a story sort of about something that we have done this last year, learned, or experienced that we're proud of. And sort of going back again quickly to the proficiency-based learning update, communication and self-direction would be the transferable skills being assessed on that. So that's something that's sort of just going on with the school and the student body right now. Some minor updates, I suppose.
The student representatives will be meeting soon to establish a stronger means of communication with each other. We will be discussing possible ways to communicate the decisions made at board meetings with interested students. And we hope that during these discussions with students, we will get an opportunity to hear what students want us to report back to you guys.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, so I've got a few things. When we got scheduling information, we also learned that our school day is going to be extended 10 more minutes. In the grand scheme, it's not the biggest thing. Those students felt like it could have been communicated better because it was at the very end, at least for the sophomore class. It was oh, by the way, you're going to have a 10-minute longer day. And then students didn't have time to ask questions initially, which led to some confusion and frustration, especially considering the way communications about change often come down to students. So that's a real strong point that especially groups like Communicating School Redesign are working on. Environmental Club is going to be hosting a clothing swap, and what's really interesting about this is we're going to be working with Middlebury and Mount Abe to pull it off, some inter-school cooperation, kind of students across the district working together, and as numbers decrease, it's important to show that students can, from different schools, work and collaborate together. All right. And just kind of my usual, there's a difference between proficiency-based learning and proficiency-based learning and proficiency-based grading. They are one and the same, and so when having these discussions, we just need to remember that at a point, proficiency-based grading is still a scale of numbers of which students are being judged against. So it's learning practices that need to change, not grading practices. And then also, which was interesting, when students got the online course book, it was noted, it was noted that online classes outside of what is offered at the school are ones that students will have to pay for themselves out of pocket, which kind of creates an equity issue. Students on free and reduced lunch, or who maybe are just in that gap where they're not on free and reduced lunch, but still really can't afford that, it creates an equity issue for students who are interested in taking other classes that aren't offered at the school, but could take online, but can't afford. So I think anything we can do to address that is great. And then the other big thing is AP classes. They might be 2 blocks, they might be 1 block. Students don't know. There's some scheduling that has to be worked out, but it would be important to note that the AP Euro class was cut to 1 block this year, and student feedback has been that it feels crammed and it feels stressed and it feels like there's a lot of information and not enough time. So when deciding class schedules, and it's important to kind of remember that students are giving feedback and would like to be listened to. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. Anything from Hannaford, Christina?
No.
Sorry. I know you're multitasking.
Wednesday night.
Okay.
But I do want to remind you, the open house got canceled last Thursday, and it's tomorrow night from 4 to 7. Anybody that wants to go. Yes, I'm busy, very, sorry. No, sorry.
There was no facilities committee, yes, no.
Negotiations?
Progressing, we have a meeting with the support staff tomorrow night and the teachers at the end of the month.
Community engagement, we're back to you, Christina.
Everybody saw the minutes from,
Yeah.
We're kind of in, on a discussion phase of where we, what's going to come next. So, some good questions out there. I think, we're going to be meeting in March. Rescheduled, but we basically, a couple of things that came up were giving tours of the schools. That was like based on some summary feedback we received. Another topic of discussion, possibly talking about school funding, having a school funding night, which sounds.
As in bring your funds.
Yeah, or to try to explain it all, which, so we're still in the beginning phases of trying to figure out our next steps, but looking for any kind of feedback. And I think once we know what the vote is, that might dictate some things, and yeah, now that we're going to be saying goodbye to Sheila too, and that's going to be changing things for us as a district. So there's some more things to talk about coming up. Yeah. And the last thing I want to throw out, we did talk about trying to do a exit poll. Not the committee per se, or we talked about it a bit, but then we thought maybe it would be really a board thing that we conduct our exit polls ourselves, so I don't know if anybody's interested in talking about that now or before.
So you're talking about exit poll on town meeting day?
Yeah.
At the,
So, I don't know if that's
To
good.
what end? Like, what kind of an exit poll are you?
You know, how'd you vote, why'd you vote that way kind of thing, I think is what the conversation was about. So we could, like, if the vote went down, we'd have some information.
Some different kind of feedback.
Yeah, yeah, or if it did pass, we'd have some.
The conversation, if I could jump in for a second, focused around like last year's budget only passing by 6 votes. It would have been helpful over the past year to know like why maybe it was, you know, so close a pass, rather than just making assumptions. So moving forward, we thought maybe having additional data on that, if we could get it, would be helpful, considering the conversations that are going to be coming up in the coming years.
and that's something that would require folks standing outside of the polling places, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that members of the committee would not maybe be interested in helping with exit polls, and maybe students, I mean, maybe it's a great opportunity for students to be part of this process, but just some ideas.
Unfortunately, it's only 2 weeks away.
It's coming right up by now.
Exactly, so.
Yeah.
There's definitely some student interest. The Racial and Social Justice Group is doing voter registration for seniors. So that group might be very well interested if students are needed.
Are you doing that before the vote, Una?
Yeah, we're going to be doing it the week after break during lunch.
Cool.
I don't know, what does everybody think?
Well, what, this board will then get feedback. Do you want it? I mean, is it gonna respond to the feedback? I'm not saying that, like, I don't mean to say it too tongue-in-cheek, but you might hear things you don't wanna hear, or you don't wanna respond to.
Well,
We always do.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So if the board's not gonna, you know, if there's not some dynamic willingness to adjust our direction based on that feedback, then I would say it's futile to try to receive the feedback, but if there's a willingness to adjust our direction based on the feedback, then we should probably try to seek it.
I think it depends on the feedback, though. Feedback is, well, we just need to eliminate all administrative positions. It's never gonna happen. So we're not gonna be able to act on that because it would be pretty much illegal for us to act on that.
So I think it depends also on which way the vote goes. I mean, if the vote goes down and we get viable feedback about why people voted that way, then I don't see why that wouldn't.
Possibly readjust for a second shot.
You know,
I mean, at the very least, it would be informative.
but let's hope it goes up. I mean, I didn't mean to.
What's that?
Let's
Yeah.
hope the vote
I
passes.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
I
I expect it to pass.
Right.
So I think it'd be great, except for it to be really accurate, we'd need to have it's a fairly substantial amount of labor.
It is.
Yeah, yeah.
That I think it may be something that we might talk about to try to do for next year. Though we can't bring it up in like it's something we have to plan for and say in August, hey, we want to make sure that we have some mechanism for doing this, because that's, 10 or 12 hours of being outside polling, having to staff in five different places. Most of us work. I'm not sure whether would we be allowed to ask students to do it? If we were, we'd need a,
Well,
anyway, I've made my point.
It's a school day.
It's a labor issue.
so-
It is a school day.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder, in terms of the Community Engagement Committee, if there might be, and I don't have a clear direction, but in assuming that it passes, assuming that we are repurposing Addison, I think the process of that process, we haven't really talked about the process of folding students into.
So I think the administration is tackling, yeah.
Perfect,
That's
great.
Admin school thing.
Right.
Okay,
Not a
perfect.
community engagement.
All right.
Again, I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Really, the Community Engagement Committee has been essential.
Well, it's a great group of people, and their willingness to come, and, we've got some parents and teachers, and it's really great that they're all willing to kind of come and be a part of it.
It's hard to hate somebody when they're across the table, right? It's
Harder.
much.
So it's good. We just,
So it sounds like people are feeling like it's kind of too big of a task to pull off in a couple weeks' time. That's kind of how I feel.
I think it's a great idea, but I
But,
would
yeah.
keep it on the
Next year.
path for the
So-
following year.
Right, so maybe add it to the CEC work plan or calendar?
Would there be some
or-
kind of web portal that they could, if they want to anonymously put in their opinions?
yeah.
But I think it's, you know,
It's a
to
lot of
Tom's
work.
point, if you want accuracy, you want to try and hit everyone, right?
All the way up.
Or the majority of people who vote, rather than
A
a minority.
statistically significant number.
Yes, a statistically significant
We have in the
portion of
past
voters.
done a small survey at the town hall at the meeting days.
Right.
Which is
before.
not, I mean, if you wanted to replicate that,
Mhm.
I think that's more manageable, and adult, one of us could do it. Even if we were on the committee, we could go and and each of us, when we say, you know, there's a forum over there, please give us some feedback, take this opportunity. That's another
Mhm.
ballgame than standing outside of a polling station trying to do an exit poll. That's
Right.
a tough
Right.
poll. So,
Right.
I don't know.
The last time that the budget went down, there was discussion on the board about, was it because it was too high or because it was too low?
Yeah.
So the information from this is really valuable, but we're kind of late to the game to put it together, I think.
I think so.
You gotta have a decision about what questions you're gonna ask and exactly how you're gonna phrase them. And you gotta take some time to develop that.
Right. So on the work plan for August. All right, okay, so my report had two things. I just summarized some information that was shared at some meetings that I went to on all of your behalf with the legislators, and also had a section about superintendent search. So I did send a letter to the Secretary of Education requesting permission to go out for a superintendent search. I have not heard back yet. He said he would let us know this week, so it's Monday. Tick, tick, tick.
I mean, like, what's he gonna say? No, you can't find another superintendent?
Well, he does have discretion, so he could say yes, but it could have stipulations in terms of the length of contract, whether we could hire for a permanent or an interim position.
Okay.
And if it were interim, he could put stipulations on what we would be expected to, you know, do during that interim time. You know, whether we need to go undertake a study or whatnot. Or, I mean, I guess it's within his prerogative to say no, which would in effect then mean he would be redrawing the SU boundaries, but I think the State Board of Ed needs to weigh in on that, so, you know, I've written a letter. I await the response.
Control what you can control.
There you go. So, we did get some information from the secretary as well as from a couple of consultants that I reached out to check on availability. And there are 11 superintendent vacancies in Vermont right now. There's reportedly a very small pool of candidates. And we are on, what did they say? On the back end, the back half of the hiring season, which is cause for an efficiently orchestrated process. And additionally, that our timeline is also challenged with 2 school vacation stretches coming up. Many superintendents are locked into their contracts around the end of March. So another point, if we are approved, even if we are approved for a permanent hire, this board can choose to go for an interim hire, which sometimes produces a different group of candidates than a permanent posting. Yes.
Did you check with the VSBA about the superintendent search, or did you just go to other individual?
I checked with the VSBA. I checked with Bob Stevens, who we worked with the last time around, and I checked with Mike DeWeese, who actually Superintendent French recommended, he said he knew he was doing them. Mike DeWeese is not available, but some of this information did come from him. He was pretty informative in his response and seemed to feel actually very bad that he couldn't help us out. And Bob Stevens is available, and the VSBA also would be available, and that would be Winton Goodrich, who would do the search through the VSBA. I guess I would say Bob knows us, and it went really well last time. He did a very good job. He does seem to have more flexibility in terms of defining or individualizing the process and the cost. But it's certainly a decision for the board to make.
So,
So given the challenging schedule that we have ahead of us, does Dan French give us any assurances that we'll get an answer promptly? Any thoughts on?
He said we should hear this week.
Okay, good, so that'll happen.
He said we should hear this week, so if we don't hear soon, I will
Then you can
follow
give him a call. And then, related to his offer to meet with us under executive session, I just want to, I know we're not voting to go into executive session over this yet.
Those are his words, Bill.
No, understood. I'm just trying to imagine a public official meeting with a public board to discuss public policy and the application of public policy. I would be very hard pressed to agree to, the specific findings.
Again,
So, no, I know
coming from the
I'm just-
Secretary of Education, not
I'm
my
just putting
words.
my thoughts out there
His
ahead of
words.
time, so I don't catch anybody off guard next time if
Right.
that comes up.
Taken, yes.
Thank you.
And he's not here tonight, so
Right. Maybe
the
we get an
likelihood
answer.
of this
We don't even
happening
need to, yeah.
might not even happen.
Excellent.
Because
Thank you.
hopefully the process will be well underway by the time this board meets again on March 9th.
Yeah.
so do we have to authorize some money because this is gonna cost?
Right, so that's down in the action items, but yes, the
Okay.
costs are, so the VSBA contract is $8,500, I believe, and it's sort of a one-size-fits-all process, unless you want to add on, there's some add-ons, but that's the basic.
We don't have that kind of extra money.
And so what they did the last time, I believe, is they let us pay it in the next fiscal year.
And that assures a hire, that money.
That's a good question.
I don't
No,
think
it
so.
doesn't assure a hire. It
assures a headhunter.
I think it does assure candidates.
That's not what
Yeah,
it assures quality candidates that
it assures candidates.
And we're one of 11.
Right. One other point, we could, before we hear back from Dan, we could always post so the main thing is we need to get it posted to get into the game. We could post it as anticipated and then delete that when we get the approval. So, but those are, I guess, decisions we'll make down here. What else do we need to know? So basically, these are all decisions that need to be made, and because we don't have sort of the answers right now, I don't know if this board wants to provisionally make all those decisions, or, what I put in action items, and this is just, you all can change it, but I thought it might make sense to just designate a subcommittee or 2 board members to sort of make these decisions on behalf of the board, and certainly everyone could give input now. If instead you decide you want to not do that and maybe declare an emergency meeting at some point to all come together and decide, there are a number of ways you can do it, but this is just what I put under action items. If you want to make a different item, then you can do that. But basically, it would be, somebody needs to approve the posting, post it either as anticipated or full-on, make a decision about which consultant to contract and take care of that. If it's going to be you know, whether it's going to be interim or permanent, and what the timeline is going to be, whether that's going to be a full committee, a full search committee, screening committee. You know, there's a process of recruiting folks. Say that again?
I suggest we wait till he gets back to the school, so we have a full understanding of what we should do.
So you're suggesting we have schedule another meeting of this board?
Yeah, in lieu of what you learned from French when he gets back to you.
Rather than delegate a subcommittee to answer that. I mean, I guess that's the question. I'm just putting out all the decision points that would need to be made. You know, establishing a committee, setting a timeline. And really, it all should be done within the next week. It needs to be done before March 9th, absolutely. And we have the annual meeting on the 24th, which is why we don't have another board meeting this month. So that's it for my report. We guess we can talk about it down in action items.
So how much did Bob give you a ballpark figure?
So he was talking about, he said if you do the full search, which is generally a 3 to 4 month process, like we did, we sort of did that. We did that last time. It was expedited. Tom chaired the committee, he's leaving. But it was expedited a little bit for time. That he said 8,000.
Okay.
But if there are ways to also shorten that process, and his fee would depend on the actual time that he spent.
But if you shorten the process, then you tend to reduce the quality of the result.
I think he was talking particularly if you're going for an interim.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, it's sort of a different candidate pool, is my understanding.
Okay.
So not necessarily, I guess.
Yeah, because if we did go with an interim, then we'd be doing another superintendent search in the next year.
Or maybe 2.
Again, depending on
True,
what.
I guess.
Yeah, it could be a 2-year.
Could be a 2-year.
Yep. Right.
It sounds like a lot to put on just a couple of members or a committee. I would think that a short board meeting just for that specific item would be more logical.
Well,
I mean, we're talking about action item D here.
right.
And I think that there is some merit to voting for 2 of us who are going to be on the board after these elections,
Right.
to just like, to kind of be some leaders here for a little while. And we may still need a meeting, but Sue's not going to be here, and one of us or 2 of us need to step up and take it on from here on out.
Yeah,
And
what do you
that's,
mean?
so I think that
You're
there's a
right.
good reason to designate 2 of us to do that, to at least manage this while we're getting our ducks in a row.
And it certainly wouldn't mean that those 2 people couldn't call a meeting or communicate out to the board in other ways. All right, no, well, better do action item A first. All right, go for it. Bills and directors. No, bills and directors orders, action item A. We're moving on to the action items.
All right, I move that the board approves total bills and directors' orders for the following: accounts payable of $854,215.02, payroll of $1,756,103.74, student disbursement $13,184.03.
Second.
Everything looked in order?
I have a
Larry?
question, and maybe I didn't see this email. Why is the payroll so high? Do you have any idea? I thought I asked that in one of the questions, in the original email. It's because I went back and looked, it's like running between 1.2 and 1.4, and this is 1.7 something. I did see there was some.
Oh, I know why. It's January. January had 3 payroll dates instead of 2.
There it is.
Boom.
That's all I needed to know.
Easy answer?
Very much. Hey,
All right, wait a minute.
good. You did that really well. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Anything
Yeah.
else? Okay, all in favor of approving those bills and directors' orders, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion passes, and we have minutes.
I move we approve the minutes from 1/22/2020.
Second.
Any edits or comments there? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
Do we have to abstain if we weren't there?
You don't have to, but
I
you can.
watched the video.
Okay.
Nice job, Tom.
Yes, it was a good job. Okay, action item C.
I move we authorize the use of up to $10,000 for the superintendent search.
Second.
Conversation?
Do we know where that $10,000?
Well, there is 20,000 consultant built into the next budget. And like I said, last time they did let us post-pay. But it's, yeah, aside from that, I don't know.
What'd you say?
I said, how do we get that by the auditors?
I think they just they billed us then. I don't know. They billed us late. They actually did. But I don't know otherwise. That's 10,000, I mean, that's a suggestion because usually it's nice to provide apples and water and
Yeah.
possibly some travel expenditures might be needed.
And if you have a meet the candidates night,
Mm-hmm.
you can have refreshments.
Maybe keep the heat on
Yeah.
Yeah.
late at night when there's still a meeting happening.
Where is that heat?
Okay, any other?
Sorry.
Okay, all in favor of authorizing the use of up to $10,000 for superintendent search, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With abstaining? Withholding? Abstaining, sorry. None, okay. Motion passes. Action item D.
I move that we designate 2 board members to lead the superintendent search pending the outcome of Secretary French's decision.
Conversation.
I think John makes a good point. We're going to need people doing this anyways, whether we have to have a meeting next week to discuss whenever Jan Kent tells us. That's fine, but there's still going to be somebody that has to take point on this. So having that decision now, even if that person or people aren't doing anything, makes sense.
I agree.
Okay, we probably should name
I'll do
the
it.
people. Oh, hey, we have one. John?
I won't be here the last week of February though. I can talk on the phone, but I won't be here in person. If that's a problem, then I would step back.
I do it too. I'm actually not going to be gone until the end of May. So
Oh, right. Tom's news. He's gonna be here.
I'm going to be here for the next couple months. Coronavirus had canceled my flight.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, so you're out, maybe, he's in. Anybody else want to do this?
I mean, I would say I would do it, but I'm gonna be gone next week.
You're gonna be gone?
What'd you say, Bill?
I
Well,
wouldn't mind helping.
Okay.
so
Well, let's,
we could do, we could amend it to make 3.
I'll second that amendment.
3 is good.
3.
See, what we're trying to do, I mean, we will get students, but what we need to do right now as a board is to take this away from Sue. And that's what this little group will do, just to get us to where we can have a
It's to
committee.
post it, figure out how you're gonna
To figure
move
all
forward.
of those kinds of logistics out.
Right.
Not to make a selection, not to.
Nothing like
that.
Review
No.
committee, yeah. it's
This is just to get the process
just to keep it-
chugging along.
Just to keep it
Yeah.
moving
Right.
before our next meeting, or several next meetings.
So John,
I'm amending it. to-
Bill, and Tom, that's
Yeah.
3 different towns, kinda like that?
Do it.
Are you
Okay.
out? Okay.
I don't need more work.
Are we pushing, are you pushing you out?
So are we back to 2?
So, wait,
That's
so there was an amendment to increase it to 3 and name those 3 folks, is that what I heard?
Sure.
And I think we need to, I think we need to actually vote on the amendment.
So I move that we do 3, and the
Right.
3 be myself,
Right.
Bill,
No, well,
and Tom.
Just the 3.
Okay, to 3.
No, you can name them too.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
part of the I don't see why not.
If anybody in this board wants to split it into 2 decisions, you can ask for that, but if not, Robert's rules allows you to combine.
Do you need a
Thank you.
second on the amendment?
I'll second the
Thank-
amendment.
All right, all in favor of the amendment to have 3 folks, and those folks be John, Bill, and Tom? Say aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay.
I know Glory's gonna be watching these.
Now we need to do the other motion.
Right, but the main motion was to designate 2 board members, so I guess
We're
it's now
designated.
3.
It's not three in their names, but we haven't decided whether we even want to do that at all.
Right,
Right.
so
I'll make
is there
a-
any other discussion
Yeah.
before we vote to actually do that? That was just the vote to accept the amendment.
Right,
Now we're
right.
voting to actually have it done. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, good luck, you guys. Yes, that will be good. So obviously I will pass along any information,
All right.
like a response that
So
will be
we,
coming.
this is your last board meeting too.
It is.
Oh, yeah.
And Lori's last board meeting, and George didn't show up for his last.
He is traveling for work.
Yeah, sure, good excuse.
He does travel for work a lot, so I have no reason to not believe him.
So I want to say, I mean, I was the board chair the first year, and it was hell. And we didn't go through nearly anything like what we've gone through since you've been on here. And I am so grateful for your leadership, and I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
That's very sweet.
She's gonna come back to every meeting and yell at us.
Just wait for public comment, which is right now. So, public, is there anyone that would like to say anything? I know, we're a little behind, sorry.
No, it's okay. My name's Jenna. I'm a resident of, Jenna Santa Maria. I'm a resident of Gems. I just wanted to touch base about the exit poll conversation that I heard. I just want to say I think it's a really great idea. You would get information that, unfortunately, like if the budget does fail, which we don't want it to, but if it does, you then could use that to readjust your thinking going forward and trying to construct a new budget. And I wanted to suggest, I hear your concerns about timing, but what about doing like a mailing home of a poll for people to take, and they can bring it with them to their voting place, and they could drop it off. So it would be an easy collection for someone who wanted to do that. And I understand the language concern, and I think that's really valid, but I see like only a few questions that would be needed, like, did you vote? Yes or no? Was the budget number too high? Was it too low? And like, if you voted no, why? And can you please explain? So I definitely think it's something that could be done still within the time frame. So I just wanted to say, like, I would urge the board to think about doing that, because that would be really useful information for you all to have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nancy?
Nancy Ambrose for Jen's resident. I have a cold, so I'll try and be clear. It was brought to the math department's attention that my position as a high school math teacher may not be filled for next year. The course selection may show we do not need a full-time high school math teacher. If we cut this position too soon, we are cutting programming. A few thoughts to consider, and I took this thinking of the students' interest first. We may not allow the current 10th and 11th grade students to finish their math course sequence as they planned. Intervention may be shortchanged. We need math labs to help all students and provide them with intervention, as you've heard from Violet's presentation, so all are successful. AP Calc may be offered with half the class time as the past compared to the past. Our most successful AP course offered at VUHS, as Una mentioned, we're in flux about what the time period for that will be. The college boards for AP Calc say a student must have 4 college prep math classes prior to AP Calc. In the future, this may be hard to achieve with the sequence of math classes. We are concerned about student choice, personalized learning in math classes here. In the past, we offered 11 math courses. That's been pared down to 8. I bring these concerns up now because it's not too late. Looking at scheduling high school math classes with the eye of cutting one full-time math teacher is premature and, in my opinion, dangerous. As the board has said very many times, once something is cut, it's hard to get it back. Again, there are a lot of mays in my concerns. I'm here stressing those now, not after it's happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
Yeah. My name is Martha DeGraff, and I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm running for a position on the board from the city of Virgins.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Chris K.
Where do you live?
Ferrisburg.
Oh,
Buzzwords like proficiency, habits of work, learning expectations, standards, learning skills and performance indicators, formatives, summatives, it's all just rebranding of what teachers have always done. All of this can be done with an understandable traditional grading system because none of this is new. Most schools have opted to stick with traditional grading. Tonight, you get a sanitized view of PBL and PBG. We don't hear from the detractors and their concerns. Their voices are excluded. Teachers are taking time off to testify about their concerns in front of State Board of Education and House Education Committee. You'll need to educate yourselves outside of this room. Read news articles and testimony. Talk to teachers. We are heading down a very scary road. When we see testing scores degrade over the next few years, who or what will be blamed? Will some future continuous improvement plan involve dismantling this demotivating system? Will we end core classes and go back to level classes? Will we go back to last year's schedule? Will we reevaluate, or will we double down, or will we simply forget? Thank you. And also, can I make an addendum to her thing? Yeah, you guys remember the Doyle poll?
Yeah.
I mean, would that be a possibility?
It was
illegal.
it was, it's gotten.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Mark.
Yeah, that never should have happened, and when he finally retired, they're like, okay. We tried it last year, or last election cycle, there was this, and every community had to pull it, and we were yelled at.
Okay, thanks. It always seemed a little
Yeah.
like, okay,
You have
thanks.
to be outside the public place.
Yes, sorry. Kim Trombley, I live in Virgins. I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm extremely surprised with what Nancy Ambrose just said. I went to school here. Mathematics was one of my favorite subjects. And just with where the world is going with STEM, I find it very surprising that that we're, especially where proficiency is with mathematics in the district, that would be the direction going. Again, I don't know if that's because of the declining numbers, but mathematics is extremely important, obviously, for our students to get good jobs after they have graduated, because that is a lot of jobs now, have that base knowledge. And poll, I think that we definitely need more data of what people are thinking and why they're voting the way that they are. That's all.
Anyone else? Okay, great.
Can I just say that just because this board doesn't do any exit polling, doesn't mean it can't be done. Anybody can do exit polls. Anyway, I would be willing to help in Addison if somebody came up with something.
So how would we, so if we did that, let's just say a group of us got together, we got all the papers, of the poll, we just hand them over to you and you guys will.
Look at them.
You'll deal with it?
We would
Yeah?
process
Okay.
them. I would.
Yeah.
I'm only one board member, so.
Right.
Information
Right,
can
the
always
whole-
be brought to the Community Engagement Committee.
That's true,
Certainly.
too.
Okay.
Or during public comment, yep. Yes.
Hi, Amy Kittredge. I'm from Addison. I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. I'm running for a position on the board.
Look at you all here.
Thank you for running. Thank you for running.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, I think everyone has spoken. Everyone has, all right, I know.
Do
You
I
too.
get to talk 3 times tonight?
No.
No.
I am not.
Right, no kidding. All right. She's already on a committee, so. Okay, we just have one final thing, the budget presentation. So I just wanted to clarify, so February 24th, we have the annual meeting at 6 o'clock. That will go through those articles of electing the moderator and the treasurer and the clerk and what else is on there? The stipends and the authority to disseminate the report electronically and the authority to borrow money in lieu of, or before we get our tax money. I think that's it. So those are all, will all be floor votes during that meeting. Immediately following that, we will have an information session, which will be run by this board. It's not run by the moderator. Not run by the district moderator. It would be run by this board, and at that point, we would present this slideshow that you all saw a draft of. So, and then following that slideshow, likely there would be a Q&A, and I was wondering, Bill, if you might be willing to moderate that Q&A? Sure. I didn't ask you before the meeting, but excellent. Yes, so any feedback on that presentation? No. Crickets, okay.
Wait.
Y'all missed the date on the front page is wrong, but don't worry, Glory caught it, so we'll fix that.
Oh, every one of us did. Who looked at the front page?
The front page.
Giant.
Okay, well, if you look at it later and you want to give feedback, just send it to me or Sheila.
When's the date that you want feedback by?
I mean, probably we should, well, we're gonna show it on the 24th. Whether we want to put it on the website prior to that or not, I guess is the question.
I thought it was pretty clear. I don't think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be. I particularly liked the budget history chart.
Yes.
That was really helpful to be able to see those.
Yeah.
See those things.
Good. Also, show of hands if who would like to present a few slides that night.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Just randomly throw people into roles as they come up.
Yeah.
13.
Just throw you up there.
All
All right.
the easy pages, no.
Christina, easy pages only. They're pretty straightforward, so, okay, great, perfect. All right, and it'd be great to take some talking points from that and talk up the budget around town at your town meetings, everywhere you go. We want our budget to pass.
Yes. During city council meeting tomorrow night, I want to talk to.
And the presentation.
How do we get on the town's agenda?
Well, we always just ask.
You just like stand up?
No, we ask ahead of time.
You literally
usually.
ask for an agenda item?
Or you can speak during public comments, but it's probably better to just ask for a few minutes if they'll grant it to you. I mean, I know in Ferrisburg, they've really appreciated that
Yeah,
lately. I'd probably the same for the other towns too.
Waltham has an other reports, and which is when I get.
Other reports?
Yeah.
All right, anyone have anything else? I think we can take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Last one.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, standing. Excellent, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night, we're only an hour behind.